Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Unlocked a Volatile Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Failure was never an option. This she knows. Rin Kurigaya knows it from her bones. Much like how she knows pain, knows neglect, and knows the grief of losing something she never had. Even though loss is the price of love, one she'll pay again and again and again. Rin's awake before her alarm rings. She puts her phone in silent, getting ready in haste. Today is the day after all. The Saints Outshining Orphanage is a complete hour away from Yui, and she couldn't afford to be late. Ri-san. A tiny voice calls out from down the hall, breaking the stillness of the early morning. Rin pauses, her fingers tightening on the straps of her backpack. She knows who it is before she even turns around. A small girl, no older than 6, comes barreling down the hallway, her bedhead sticking out in every direction. Her mismatched socks barely cling to her feet as she skids to a stop in front of Rin, wide eyes filled with excitement. "Good morning, Haruka," Rin says softly, her voice just above a whisper. She kneels down to the child's level, smoothing out her frizzy hair. "What are you doing up so early? You should still be in bed." Haruka shakes her head vigorously, clutching the edge of Rin's shirt. "I wanted to see you before you left. You're going to Yui today, right? The hero school?" Rin hesitates for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, today's the big day." Haruka's eyes sparkle with awe. "Will you be a hero, Ri-san? Like All Might?" The question catches Rin off guard, though she keeps her expression steady. A hero. The word feels heavy, laden with expectations she's not sure she can meet. She had always told herself that she'd become something more than what anyone bothered to think of her, but "I'll try," Rin finally says, brushing a strand of hair behind Haruka's ear. "But I have to go now. It's a long trip, and I don't want to be late." Haruka lets go of her shirt reluctantly, her face falling slightly. But you'll come back, right? You'll visit us." Chuckling, Rin shook her head. "Today's the exam day, Haruka-chan. I'm not going off to become a hero right away. If only it were that easy." She stands and gives the little girl a small smile before turning toward the door. The other children are still asleep, the staff barely stirring. Rin slips out of the orphanage quietly, the cold morning air biting at her skin as she steps outside. Saints Outshining Orphanage. What a name, Rin thinks as she walks down the dimly lit street. A place that claimed to raise heroes, yet the children inside were barely cared for. But the saints didn't shine for everyone. Some were left in the dark, forgotten. Like her. Rin quickens her pace, her mind on the journey ahead. She'd wager that most students in Yui had never known what it was like to be abandoned. They didn't understand the weight of surviving alone. But that didn't matter. She would make them see. Failure is not an option. Not for her. And it wasn't going to start today. Rin stepped off the train, her nerves threatening to get the best of her as she approached the towering gates of Yui High. The sight of the grand building, where so many hopefuls would soon become heroes, brought a lump to her throat. The school loomed over the city like a fortress of hope, a symbol of everything she wanted to achieve, but also of everything she could lose. There were other students present, of course, with a plethora of quirks, mutations, emitters, and transformations. A good number were already using their quirks in practice, probably from nerves. Rin felt a familiar twinge in her stomach as she watched the other students casually display their quirks. Some showed off their fire abilities, others sent small bursts of electricity between their fingers, and a few had strange animalistic features, wings, tails, claws. The air was filled with energy, tension, and anticipation. For many of them, using their quirks seemed as natural as breathing, and it made her painfully aware of her own hesitation. Rin's quirk, Manilicule, emitted a soft purple pulse on her hand, forming a solid disc as she looked at it. It wasn't much. The biggest disc she could produce was just large enough to cover her body as a shield, but it had potential. Years of self-study had made her realize that her quirk was more complex than she initially thought. She wasn't simply generating shields from nowhere. She was manipulating molecules, pulling them together and creating solid objects by bonding the atoms in the air and ground around her. When she was younger, Rin thought her quirk was limited to just defense. A simple shield she could throw up to protect herself or others. Little Rin, with her bright hazel eyes and boundless optimism, had called it shield, a straightforward name for what she assumed was a straightforward power. But as she grew older, as her understanding of chemistry and physics deepened, Rin began to understand the true intricacies of her quirk. It wasn't just shield. She was rearranging molecular structures at a basic level, bonding atoms together to create temporary constructs, though the migraines that came with prolonged use of her quirk served as a reminder of its complexity and its limits. She still had a long way to go before she could fully assess it. But one thing was clear: Molecula was no ordinary quirk. Rin's hand pulsed again, the purple hue intensifying for a moment before the disc wavered. She dispelled it with a sigh, rubbing her temple as the faint signs of a migraine started to creep in. She could feel the mental strain building. You need to control this better, she told herself. If she was going to succeed at UA, she needed to push her limits while keeping herself in check. Busy inside her own head, Rin didn't see the cracked piece of pavement sticking out in front of her. Her thoughts were still swirling between the pain of her fading migraine and the adrenaline of the upcoming exam, so she didn't notice the uneven ground until it was too late. She was about to trip. But instead, Rin found herself momentarily suspended in midair, as if gravity had suddenly lost its hold on her. For a second, she blinked, confused, before a sharp voice rang out. "Release!" In an instant, she was slammed back down onto the pavement, her knees hitting the ground with a harsh thud. Grimacing, she braced herself on her arms, feeling the impact reverberate through her body. Before she could fully gather her bearings, she heard a panicked yelp from behind. "I'm so sorry." Rin turned her head, still rubbing her sore arms, and saw a girl rushing toward her, her hands raised in apology. She was small and wide-eyed, clearly flustered. Rin's mind quickly pieced it together. This girl had used her quirk to momentarily levitate her and then let go too soon. "I didn't mean to." "Oh no, are you okay?" "I thought you were going to fall, and I panicked, so I used my quirk without thinking." The girl's words tumbled out in a rapid stream, her face flushed with embarrassment. Rin shook her head slightly, standing up and brushing the dust off her knees. "It's fine. No harm done," she said, trying to muster a reassuring smile despite the ache in her legs. "Thanks for trying to help." The girl gave her a sheepish look, still clearly nervous. "I should have been more careful. I didn't even think about how you'd land." Rin waved off the apology, taking a deep breath. "Seriously, it's okay. What's your name?" The girl looked up, blinking, then smiled shyly. "I'm Ochako Uraraka. I just don't usually use my quirk on people." "Kirigaya Rin," she introduced herself, rubbing her shoulder where she'd landed awkwardly. "Your quirk, what does it do exactly?" "Oh." Ochako perked up slightly. "It lets me manipulate the gravity around small objects and people. I can lift them up, make them float, but it doesn't last long, otherwise I start throwing up. I haven't really practiced it on people that much, so it's a bit tricky." Rin nodded. "It'll come with practice. You saved me from falling on my face, so that's something." Ochako laughed nervously. "Well, at least I didn't drop you too hard." The two shared a brief smile before Rin straightened, her mind refocusing on the exam. "I should get going," Rin said, glancing toward the entrance. "But thanks again, Ochako-san. Good luck." Ochako smiled, eyes determined. "You too." Yui looks even more impressive from the inside, if that were even possible. The sleek, towering walls of the entrance hall gleamed in the sunlight filtering through the massive windows, and the sheer size of the place was overwhelming. Everything about it exudes an aura of greatness, as if the very walls themselves held the weight of all the heroes who had passed through these halls before. Rin's breath caught in her throat as she took it all in. Students milled about, their excitement palpable. Some were whispering in awe, others were already moving in groups, forming bonds and chatting about the upcoming entrance exam. There were a few who walked with the confidence of people who had known they were destined for this their whole lives, their heads held high and proud. It was clear that this school wasn't just a dream to them, it was their birthright. Rin felt a small pang of uncertainty but quickly brushed it away. I made it here. She reminded herself that I could do this. She kept her head down, her nerves creeping higher with each step, but she reminded herself to breathe. The buzzing of the crowd grew louder as students filed into the auditorium, gathering for what was likely the welcome assembly. Rin followed, feeling the weight of anticipation settle over her again. The vastness of the place, combined with the atmosphere of possibility, was almost overwhelming. But there was also a spark of something else, excitement. The idea that anything could happen here. The written test was both easier and harder than Rin had expected. As she worked through the questions, she felt a strange mix of confidence and doubt. The essays had come naturally to her. She had always been good at articulating her thoughts on paper, especially when it came to topics like ethics and heroism. Writing about what it meant to be a hero, the importance of responsibility, and the weight of power had flowed from her mind almost effortlessly. She was sure those answers would impress the examiners. Math flowed over her easily. She loved her numbers. But then came the science portion. Rin had studied hard, poring over textbooks and notes in the weeks leading up to the exam. She knew that understanding the science behind quirks, as well as the physics of hero work, was crucial. Yet, as she read the more complex questions, especially those related to advanced chemistry and molecular structures, her confidence wavered. Despite her quirk's connection to manipulating molecules, the technical details often slipped through her grasp. She scribbled answers as best as she could, her mind racing to connect what she knew about chemistry with the more theoretical questions. But by the time she reached the final page, she couldn't help but feel that her responses were lacking. There were gaps in her understanding, and she knew it. By the time the exam ended, Rin let out a quiet sigh, leaning back in her chair. She wasn't sure how she'd done. The essays felt strong. She's never worried about math in her life, but the sciences, she wasn't so sure. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. There was no point in dwelling on it now. As the proctors collected the exams, Rin glanced around the room. Some students looked completely at ease, like the test had been a breeze for them. Others wore the same tired expression she imagined she had. It was done now, and all she could do was wait for the results. "What's up, UE candidates?" Rin jumped out of her musings, wincing. "Dear God, it's Present Mike. Thanks for tuning to me, your school DJ. Come on, let me hear ya." Oh God. It was Rin's weakness. One of many awkwardness. Feeling sorry for Present Mike, Rin gave a weak clap, the sound echoing in the quiet auditorium. Slowly, other students followed her lead, and claps trickled in from around the room. By the looks of it, it made Present Mike's day. His grin stretched wide across his face as he beamed with pride, his usual energetic self magnified by the small gesture of support. Rin smiled. "Alright." Present Mike drawled, his voice booming once more. "Let's get to the main show. Let's talk about how the practical exam is going to go, okay?" Instantly, Rin's back straightened, her attention fully locked onto the pro hero. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The practical exam was where she could prove herself, show that she belonged here with the future heroes of the world. The exam will take place in different battle centers, each of you will be assigned to one. Present Mike explained, the giant screen behind him lighting up with various maps and locations. Your task? To take down as many villain robots as you can. Each type of robot is worth different points depending on their difficulty. But be careful, some of these bots are built to be tougher than others. Rin leaned forward in her seat, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair as she listened intently. She needed to know every detail, every possible advantage she could take to maximize her score. This wasn't just about brute force, it was about strategy, about knowing when to use her quirk and when to hold back. "Excuse me, sir." Someone from the front shot up their hand. "I have a question." "Hit me," Mike nodded. "On the printout," the boy continued, his tone growing more intense as he held up the paper, "you've listed 4 types of villains, not 3. A hush fell over the auditorium as the boy's voice carried through the space. "With all due respect, he went on, adjusting his glasses once more. If this is an error on official UE materials, it is shameful. We are exemplary students. We expect the best from Japan's most notable school. The air around them tensed as murmurs rippled through the crowd, some students exchanging confused glances. Rin glanced down at her own printout, eyes scanning the page. Sure enough, there it was, 4 types of villain bots listed, but Present Mike had only talked about 3. Still, she frowned, eyeing the boy warily. UE was Thebia's school in Japan. It didn't make mistakes. Present Mike blinked, clearly caught off guard by the pointed critique. For a brief moment, his usual exuberance faltered. But he quickly recovered, flashing a wide grin as he raised both hands in mock surrender. Whoa there, Four Eyes. No need to go full throttle on me, he said, his voice still carrying its usual energy. You're right, they're rare for types listed, but the 4th one's special. He pointed to the large screen behind him as it flickered, showing the image of a massive, towering robot. That big guy right there? That's the 0-pointer. It's not worth any points, but you'll want to keep your eyes peeled, 'cause if you get in its way, you're in for a world of hurt. Avoid it if you can, but if you're feeling brave, you might just find another way to shine. A mix of relief and tension filled the room. The students leaned back in their seats, some letting out quiet sighs, while others, like the boy who had asked the question, remained stiff and alert. Rin felt a rush of understanding hit her. The 0-pointer.it was a distraction, a trap for those too focused on brute force, but if there was no point value to it, if someone got caught in its path, would stepping in to help score more than defeating a regular bot? Are there other ways to gain points? Or is the presence of the 0-pointer wreaking havoc the trick in and of itself? Her mind raced with possibilities, and she realized that this exam was more complex than just smashing through enemies. It was about being smart, thinking like a hero, and knowing when to fight and when to help. The boy sat down with a sharp nod, seemingly satisfied with the answer, though his face remained serious. Present Mike clapped his hands together. And with that, we're all clear. Now, get ready to show us what you're made of out there. Plus Ultra. As the students began filing out of the auditorium to head to their assigned testing areas, Rin's mind raced. She knew her quirk had limitations. The migraines, the strain it caused on her body, but she also knew that if she could focus on strategy, she could make up for any weaknesses in her quirk. All applicants, please proceed to your designated battle centers. The practical exam will begin shortly. The time had come. Rin followed the crowd as they made their way to their respective testing grounds. The closer they got, the more her heart pounded in her chest. Battle Center E was a sprawling mock city, designed to simulate real-world environments where heroes would operate. Rin stood at the starting line, her gaze fixed forward as she waited for the signal. Her heart raced, but she grounded herself by flicking her hands. The countdown began. 3. She clenched her fists, feeling her quirk bristle beneath her skin. 2. Her breath steadied, her focus sharpening. 1. Failure is not an option. Start. The gates flung open, thus the chaos began. Rin bolted forward, her legs carrying her into the mock city as students scattered in every direction, quirk energy lighting up the streets. She spotted her first target, a 1-point villain bot crawling along the side of a building. Without hesitation, she summoned a purple disc from her hand, angled it just right, and with a swift flick of her wrist, slice. The bot crumbled to pieces. Grinning, she barely had time to admire her handiwork. In a world filled with quirks, very rarely were people allowed to actually use them in public. But here, today, there were no restrictions, just the rush of adrenaline and the need to prove herself. But there was no time to stop. She needed more points. Rin weaved between buildings, dodging chunks of flying debris and the flashing lights of quirk attacks from other students. The city was alive with battle, robots towering over buildings, energy blasts cutting through the air. Larger villain bots loomed in the distance, but Rin knew better than to rush into them head-on. She had to be smart about it, pace herself, and conserve her strength for the right moment. She made quick work of a few more one-pointers, her discs slicing through their metal exteriors with surgical precision. Each time she used her quirk, She could feel the strain slowly building in her head, a faint pressure that warned her not to overdo it. Her quirk was effective, but prolonged use would take a toll. She couldn't afford to waste energy on showmanship. Every move had to count. After taking down her 7th two-pointer bot, Rin paused for a brief moment, catching her breath as she surveyed the battlefield. The damages around her were immense. Robot parts littered the streets, smoke rising from the destroyed bots and buildings that had been used as collateral. It was like something out of a war zone. Her mind wandered for a moment, wondering just how Rushui must be able to afford such elaborate tests every year. The sheer destruction seemed absurd. Were they rebuilding the city after every exam, or were there different locations for each one? Rin shook her head, pushing the thought aside. Focus. She needed to focus. As she turned to move again, a loud rumble echoed through the mock city, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Students nearby gasped, their eyes widening as they looked toward the source of the sound. The zero-pointer. Rin's heart skipped a beat as the massive, lumbering machine came into view. It towered over the buildings, its size and power dwarfing the other villain bots she had been fighting. Around her, students scrambled to get out of its path, knowing full well that it wasn't worth any points, and that getting too close could end their chances in the exam. No points, Rin reminded herself. Don't waste time on it. But as she began to turn away, something caught her eye. A girl, Ochako, was trapped under a pile of rubble, struggling to get free. She was too close to the zero-pointer, and it was moving in her direction, its giant mechanical foot ready to crush everything in its path. Rin hesitated for only a second. The logical part of her screamed to keep moving, to focus on the points and avoid unnecessary risks. Totally unnecessary. Yui wouldn't put their prospective students in danger, right? But the rest of her, the worrier, the concerned friend, the girl who wanted to be seen, knew what she had to do. Without a second thought, she bolts toward Ochako Uraraka. Hey, now what? Shield. But was it strong enough? Rin grabbed Ochako's outstretched arm, her fingers trembling as the weight of the situation bore down on her. The ground beneath them quaked as the zero-pointer drew closer, the mechanical behemoth's foot looming above, casting a dark shadow over them both. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Ignoring the searing pain shooting through her skull, her quirk always did this when she pushed it too far. Rin threw her other hand into the air. The familiar purple energy sparked to life, swirling above them before forming a dome-like shield, a solid barrier encasing them in a protective bubble. But was it strong enough? The migraine hit her almost instantly, sharp and unforgiving, like a hammer pounding inside her head. Come on, hold it together, she begged herself. Please, hold. Her world slowed to a crawl as the zero-pointer's foot came crashing down, but just as it was about to slam into her shield with an earth-shaking force, it stopped. The massive machine froze in place, and Rin blinked in confusion. Time's up. Present Mick's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, signaling the end of the exam. Ochako's voice reached her, faint and panicked. Rin, are you okay? Rin let out a breathless laugh, her body sagging with relief. Yeah, she said, barely believing it herself. Holy shit. She turned toward Ochako, who was still pinned under the rubble, and sent her a wide grin. That was, wait, you're still stuck? As if only just realizing it herself, Ochako blinked in surprise, her cheeks flushing. Oh, yeah. Before either of them could react, a loud, booming voice interrupted the moment, making them both squeal in surprise. Are you guys all right? Rin whipped her head up and saw a tall boy flying above them, riding a gust of wind that whirled around him like a small tornado. His voice was as loud as the wind he was controlling, and he seemed to be practically beaming with energy. Here, let me help you, he shouted enthusiastically, clearly not fazed by the destruction around him. Before Rin could say a word, the tornado expanded, swirling toward them. With a sudden whoosh, both she and Ochako, along with the rubble, were lifted into the air. Rin's stomach dropped, and despite every ounce of dignity she could muster, she found herself letting out a very undignified scream. Put me down, she yelled, her voice cracking as she was swept up by the wind. Beside her, Ochako was also floating helplessly, but she seemed a bit more composed, blinking in surprise at their sudden ascent. "Oh wow! We're flying!" Rin, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as thrilled. There totally weren't tears in her eyes, I noticed. The boy, still grinning, guided them safely back to the ground, the tornado shrinking away as soon as their feet touched the pavement. "There you go. All safe and sound." He landed beside them, dusting off his hands as if it was the most casual thing in the world. Ochako smiled at him, looking far more collected than Rin felt. "Thanks. That was really cool." "Yeah. Thanks for the ride," Rin muttered, still catching her breath, her heart racing from the unexpected flight. She wasn't exactly fond of being swept up in tornadoes, but at least Ochako wasn't trapped under rubble anymore. "No problem," the boy beamed. "Glad to help out. Name's Yurashi Inesa, by the way. Good luck with the rest of the day." He waved at them before dashing off, leaving a small whirlwind in his wake as he hurried to assist other students. As the adrenaline slowly ebbed from her veins, Rin groaned, rubbing her temples. "That was not how I thought today was going to go." Ochako chuckled softly, finally standing free from the rubble, thanks to Yurashi's help. "Could have been worse," she offered with a smile. "At least we're not squashed." Rin snorted, the absurdity of the situation finally hitting her. "You're right. I guess we survived." The two girls made eye contact, and as if a spell had been cast, both of them suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. The kind of laughter that comes when the tension breaks after a moment of intense stress. The adrenaline, the chaos of the exam, the giant robots, the near-crushing moment, it all felt like something out of a ridiculous dream now. Rin doubled over, clutching her stomach, her laugh uncontrollable. Ochako wasn't much better, wiping tears from her eyes as she tried to calm down but kept getting swept back into the giggles. "Can you?" Rin gasped between laughs. "Can you believe we almost got flattened and then just flew out of it like it was nothing?" Ochako nodded, struggling to catch her breath. "And you screaming to be put down." Rin groaned, laughing even harder. "Don't remind me. It wasn't my finest moment. I'm scared of heights." Rin was scared of a lot of things. They stood there for a few minutes, their laughter echoing in the now quiet aftermath of the exam. Other students passed by, some giving them confused looks, but the two girls were too lost in the hilarity of the situation to care. When the laughter finally subsided, the two of them were left leaning against each other for support, catching their breath, a shared bond formed in the chaos of the day. "Well," Rin said, still grinning, "I don't know about you, but that was one hell of an entrance exam." Ochako nodded, a tired but happy smile on her face. "Definitely unforgettable." Rin may have been sore for the next 3 whole days, every muscle in her body protesting with every step she took. Her arms ached from using her quirk so much, her legs felt like jelly, and her head still throbbed from the overexertion. But despite the physical toll, her mood was on an entirely different level. She floated through those days like she was walking on air, the memory of the exam replaying in her mind over and over again. But despite the lingering high, doubt gnawed at her. Did I pass? Was I disqualified? Her thoughts kept cycling, overanalyzing every moment. Should I have shielded Ochako-san, even though the 0-pointer stopped before it crushed her? What if they thought I wasted time? What if I failed? The possibility sent her spiraling. She had no backup plan. No alternate path to follow if this didn't work out. Plan A was becoming a pro hero by getting into Yui. There was no plan B. Her entire future hinged on that exam. If she didn't make it, if all the pain and effort amounted to nothing, what would she do? She had no wealthy family to fall back on, no safety net waiting to catch her. What would the kids at the orphanage think? What about Haruka-chan? Would she see me as a failure too? Rin clenched her fists as she walked home from the train station, her body still sore but her mind racing. Every step felt heavier as her thoughts spiraled deeper. "Stop it," she told herself, trying to shake off the doubt. "You did your best. That has to count for something, right?" But even as she tried to calm herself, the fear of rejection loomed larger. If she didn't get in, it wasn't just her dream that would be shattered. It was the one thing she was holding on to, the one thing she believed would give her life meaning. Rin took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Focus on what you can control, she reminded herself. She just had to wait. It arrived exactly 1 week later. A small envelope, stamped with the official Yui High emblem was left in the orphanage's mailbox that morning. Rin stood frozen for a moment, staring at it, her heart hammering in her chest. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for, dreading, obsessing over. Ri-san. Yusuke's voice called out. Ri-san. Later. Rin yelled back, already spinning on her heel. She hurried upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, no running. Ignoring the distant reprimand from one of the caretakers. Her hands shook as she clutched the envelope to her chest, her pulse racing. That I have to see. I have to know. She slammed her bedroom door shut, her breath coming in shallow gasps, grateful that her roommate, May, wasn't around. The small room felt like it was closing in on her as she stared down at the envelope. For a moment, she stood there, clutching the letter to her chest, her mind racing through 100 scenarios. Slowly, she slid a trembling finger under the seal, tearing the envelope open. Inside, she found a small, familiar device. She recognized it immediately. The same device the Ochako had talked about through text that same morning, the one that held their results. Rin's heart pounded in her ears as she pressed the button on the device, her hands shaking. The screen flickered to life, and her stomach twisted with nerves. Then, the room filled with Present Mix's booming voice. Yo, Rin Kuragaya. Congratulations. You did it. Her breath caught in her throat, her legs wobbling. Did it? You showed some real hero instincts out there. Present Mix's voice continued, as animated as ever. Not only did you rack up enough combat points to pass, but you also earned a big boost in rescue points. Jumping in to save your classmate from that 0-pointer? That's what being a hero's all about. Rin could barely breathe. She had passed. As Present Mix's final words, "Welcome to Yui High," echoed in the now quiet room, the screen went dark, leaving Rin in stunned silence. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her chest heaving as the weight of the moment settled in. She had done it. She had really done it. Her eyes drifted down to the letter that had come with the device. In her haze of emotions, she hadn't noticed the fine print. There, printed neatly in bold letters, was something that made her heart leap even higher. Welcome to Class IA. Her fingers trembled as she traced the letters, barely able to believe her eyes. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. This was the class of heroes. The class that would be led by the best teachers and have the most challenging experiences. It was everything she had dreamed of, and everything she had feared she might not be worthy of. With the letter clutched tightly in her hands, she let out a long, shaky breath and leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling with a dazed smile. She's in. Let's backtrack a little. My name is Rin Kuragaya, and I live in a world where 80% of the population have quirks, unique, superhuman abilities that range from the simple to the downright bizarre. In a world like this, where heroes are idolized and villains constantly lurk in the shadows, people like me grow up dreaming of one thing: becoming a hero. But dreams like that don't come easy. Besides, this story isn't about me. I guess there isn't really a singular story happening here. Everyone has their own path, their own challenges, and in a world like ours, those paths intertwine more than anyone can imagine. But if there's one thing I'm certain of, one thing that ties everything together, it's this. It's about the best Gestero the world has ever seen. My hero, Izuku Midoriya. Act 1. Origins. 10 years ago. So, you see over here, the doctor pointed to an X-ray on the light board, highlighting a specific area. Your son is missing the joint on his pinky toe, indicating that he is going to get his quirk eventually. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and disbelief. He looked at his mother, then back at the doctor. Young Midoriya's a late bloomer, the doctor added with a reassuring smile. Izuku, his mama exclaimed, her voice trembling with joy as her eyes welled up with tears of relief. Did you hear that? You're going to get a quirk. Infected by Mama's overwhelming happiness, Izuku felt his own eyes begin to water as well. I am really going to get a quirk? Izuku asked, his voice shaky with disbelief. The doctor nodded, still smiling. That's right, young man. You're just a late bloomer. But there's no need to worry anymore. Izuku Midoriya, it turns out, was the perfect blend between his parents. His hair, for one, was a lighter green, a vibrant forest green, softer than his mother's dark emerald but not as stark as his father's white. It was as though someone had taken a paintbrush and blended Hisashi's pale hair with Inko's deep green, creating something entirely unique. In the sunlight, his hair shimmered almost like the canopy of a forest in early spring, soft, yet full of life. His mother often ran her fingers through it, finding comfort in the familiar texture that reminded her so much of her own, while Hisashi saw the resemblance to his own hair in the way it lightened when hit with light. Even little Izuku's freckles were almost a direct match to all for one's own. Of course, little Izuku had no idea. To him, his freckles were just a part of who he was, something he'd had for as long as he could remember. They added to his boyish charm, a reminder of his innocence and youth. In a world where quirks defined people, the freckles on his face were one of the few things that made him stand out, quirk or no quirk. He had his father's nose, sharp and defined, a feature that seemed to anchor his face with a sense of seriousness, even when his expressions were full of childlike wonder. But his eyes, those were all his mother's. Large, expressive, and full of emotion, they were the kind of eyes that revealed everything he felt, whether he wanted them to or not. Inko's eyes had always been a mirror to her heart, and Izuku had inherited that same depth of feeling, wearing his emotions openly for the world to see. Whether it was excitement, fear, hope, or even doubt, you could always see it in his eyes, glowing with an intensity that never seemed to fade. His quirk, hopefully, will also be a careful blend of them both, pool and all for one. Hisashi Midoriya carefully laid his beloved son down in bed, the child's small body sinking into the soft mattress, tired from the long journey to Garaki's. Izuku's breathing was steady, the rise and fall of his chest the only sign of life as he slept peacefully, oblivious to the weight that pressed upon his father's shoulders. Hisashi, standing over him, was met with a flood of emotions, so strong, so contradictory, that he almost felt paralyzed by them. The overwhelming longing to protect his son surged inside him, to shield him from the cruel realities of the world, to ensure that Izuku could live without the burdens Hisashi himself carried. But right alongside that was the instinct to nurture, to foster the strength within Izuku that could someday help him survive what has to come. Hisashi's eyes lingered on his son's sleeping face, so innocent, so pure. Izuku had no idea of the complex web he was already entangled in. Hisashi's mind briefly flickered to Garaki, the doctor who knew too much, who held too many secrets. And yet, Izuku was spared from that for now. For how long, though? Hisashi wondered, his expression hardening. He gently brushed a stray strand of green hair from Izuku's forehead, his fingers trembling just slightly. As if sensing his father's thoughts, Izuku's eyes slowly blinked awake. "Papa," he murmured. He hasn't seen him all day, after all. Hisashi has been busy with other matters. Hisashi hushed softly, "Go back to sleep. I'm missing a joint in my pinky toe." It was too late to stop the smile forming on Hisashi's face, a rare flicker of warmth breaking through his usual self. "Is that right?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Garaki had given him the news long before it had reached the rest of the family. He crouched down next to Izuku, his eyes narrowing playfully as he pretended to study his son's feet with exaggerated focus. "Your joint in your pinky toe?" His voice trailed off in mock seriousness, mumbling to himself as if this was a grand mystery that needed solving. Izuku, sitting on the edge of the bed, grinned widely, barely able to contain his excitement. "Yeah, Papa. The doctor said I'm going to get a quirk. I'm just a late bloomer, that's all." His little face was alight with joy, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his small shoulders. Hisashi nodded slowly, rubbing his chin in mock contemplation. A late bloomer?" He looked at Izuku and couldn't help but chuckle softly. Despite everything he knew, Hisashi allowed himself to just be a father, basking in his son's happiness. Izuku's eyes sparkled with hope. "I'm going to have a quirk, Papa. I'll be able to help people, Just like you. Of course, that was what Izuku Hisashi helped people. In a way. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Hisashi's smile faltered slightly, just for a second. Izuku's innocence, his unshakable belief in the world, in him, stung. But he quickly recovered, ruffling Izuku's messy green hair. That's right, Hisashi said, his voice softer now. You're going to be strong, Izuku. Stronger than you know. To Hisashi's surprise, Izuku's joyful expression began to falter, his bright eyes clouding with uncertainty. The shift was sudden, the excitement draining from his face as his small hands fidgeted in his lap. He bit his lip, his voice coming out quieter now, laced with worry. What if I don't get a strong quirk? Izuku asked. Like All Mights? I wouldn't be able to be a hero. Here it goes. Why would it matter? Hisashi asked softly, still playing with his son's unruly hair, trying to keep his tone light but sincere. I would love you even if you were quirkless. Izuku looked up at him, his wide green eyes shining with surprise. His little hands stopped fidgeting, and he blinked up at Hisashi as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the quiet sound of their breathing, the weight of Hisashi's words sinking in. It would change his plans, sure. Hisashi knew that much. Izuku's future, the expectations, the path he had thought of for his son, it all revolved around quirks and power. But as he looked at his son now, the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, none of that mattered. Hisashi hadn't had a family since the first holder of One for All, and here was his chance to finally have something real, something precious. He'd like to think he'd love his son even if he was quirkless, even if it wasn't true. I would love you no matter what, Hisashi repeated, this time with more certainty. Always. Izuku's eyes brimmed with tears, but this time, they weren't from fear or sadness, they were from relief. His little shoulders relaxed, and a smile crept back onto his face. He nodded slowly, as though he was accepting the words, even internalizing them. But his expression changed so quickly, just like always. One moment he was overwhelmed, the next he was bouncing with newfound determination. And forever, he added with a sudden burst of energy, the certainty in his small voice almost humorous given how much it contrasted with his earlier doubts. Hisashi chuckled softly, warmth filling his chest despite the complicated emotions swirling within. His son could switch from one emotion to the next in the blink of an eye, but that was just who Izuku was. His heart as big as his dreams. Always and forever, Hisashi agreed, giving his son a gentle smile. Izuku grinned, wiping away his tears, as if the weight of the world had lifted off his tiny shoulders. Hisashi watched him, feeling a surge of pride, but also a quiet ache. For now, though, this moment was enough. Always and forever was a promise he could keep for today. 7 years ago. Hisashi, maybe it's not that bad? Inko struggled to keep up with her husband, taking double the steps the man took in stride. You know what they say, she continued, boys will be boys. Izuku, his son, has been hurt. And it was by that boy again. The one Izuku calls his friend. Katsuki Bakugo. But, she began, her voice faltering as she tried to find the right words. But Izuku never complains. He always forgives Kaken. Maybe it's not as bad as we think. Hisashi stopped abruptly, turning to face her, his eyes flashing with anger. Inko, our son came home with bruises yesterday. Today, he's in the nurse's office. He forgives that boy because he's too kind. Because he doesn't want to cause trouble. But how long do we let this go on? Inko's shoulders slumped. She knew he was right. Every time Izuku came home with new scrapes and bruises, he waved it off with a smile, saying that Kaken didn't mean to hurt him or that it was just an accident. But deep down, Inko worried about the growing distance between her son and his peers, especially Bakugo. And Hisashi? He was done waiting for things to change on their own. I won't let Izuku keep getting hurt like this. Not anymore, Hisashi said firmly. I'm talking to the boy's parents. Inko nodded quietly, but inside, her heart ached for Izuku. He looked up to Katsuki, always had. Even when Katsuki pushed him away, Izuku kept running after him, hoping one day his admiration would be returned. But how much more would Izuku have to endure before something broke? How long before his kindness and forgiveness became scars too deep to heal? As they reached the front door of their home, Inko sighed softly. I just hope Kaken can change. For Izuku's sake. Hisashi nodded, his expression not changing. For all our sakes. Inside the nurse's office, Izuku sat on the edge of the bed, swinging his legs lightly, a sheepish grin plastered on his face. His arm was bandaged, and a few scrapes dotted his knees and elbows, but he shrugged it off like it was nothing. His wide, apologetic eyes flicked between his parents as they entered the room. Papa, Mama. It was an accident, he said, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly, trying to downplay the situation. Inko's heart clenched as she rushed to her son's side, immediately checking over him despite the nurse having already done so. Izuku, sweetie, are you sure? That looks like it hurt, she fussed, her fingers hovering over the bandages as if her touch alone could soothe the pain away. Hisashi, however, stood a few steps behind her, his arms crossed and his expression far less forgiving. Another accident? His voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. He wasn't buying it, not this time. Izuku's sheepish grin faltered slightly, but he kept up his sunny demeanor. Yeah, Papa. Kaken didn't mean it. We were just playing and I guess I got in the way, that's all. Inko exchanged a worried glance with Hisashi. Izuku had used this same excuse too many times before. His injuries were always accidents, and Bakugo was always just playing. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Hisashi sighed, crouching down to look Izuku in the eyes, his expression softening but still firm. Izuku, we've talked about this before. You don't have to keep pretending it's okay if someone hurts you, even if they're your friend. Izuku's face fell a little, his usual spark of optimism dimming. But Kaken's not trying to hurt me. He's strong, and sometimes things just happen. But it's fine. Really? He looked between his parents, desperation creeping into his voice. I want to be strong like him one day so I can take it. Inko's heart broke a little at her son's words. Izuku admired Katsuki so much, but it was clear the admiration came at a cost. Hisashi exhaled, his frustration evident. Izuku, strength isn't just about enduring everything. It's about knowing when to stand up for yourself. You shouldn't have to get hurt to be strong. Izuku bit his lip, unsure of how to respond. He knew his parents were worried, but in his heart, he didn't want to cause any more trouble. To him, Kaken was still his friend. What happened? Hisashi demanded. Izuku flinched, his wide eyes dropping to the floor, guilt evident in the way his small hands fidgeted. Hisashi saw it immediately and sighed, sitting down on the bed next to his son. The tension in the room eased as he pulled Izuku into his lap, feeling the weight of the day settle in. His green hair, always unruly, was even messier now, sticking out in all directions. Inko, standing beside them, smiled softly as she gently ruffled their son's hair, her touch tender and comforting. Instantly, Izuku curled into Hisashi's embrace, hiding his face in his father's chest like the young boy he was. 7. Izuku was 7. Izuku, Hisashi said again, this time much softer, the frustration in his voice replaced with concern. What happened? For a moment, there was only silence, save for the ticking of the clock in the nurse's office. Hisashi felt his son trembling slightly, and he tightened his arms around him, trying to offer reassurance. Inko sat down beside them, her presence calm and steady, waiting patiently. Izuku's voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. He was mad. I don't know why. But I tried to talk to him, and then he just exploded. I wasn't fast enough to get out of the way. He sniffled, curling further into his father's chest. It wasn't his fault. I got in the way. Hisashi exchanged a glance with Inko. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. Did you do anything to make him angry? Izuku shook his head quickly, burying his face deeper into Hisashi's shirt. No, Papa. I just wanted to help him with his schoolwork. Inko's heart broke a little more at her son's innocence, his desperate need to believe that Katsuki wasn't intentionally hurting him. Izuku, sweetie, Sometimes people aren't always kind, even if they're your friends. But he is a me friend, mama. Izuku insisted, his voice muffled but determined. Kaken's just strong, and I'm not strong enough yet. I need to be stronger so he won't have to protect me all the time. Hisashi closed his eyes. He knew Izuku's heart. He was too kind, too forgiving. Listen to me, Izuku, Hisashi said gently, placing a hand on his son's small shoulder. Being strong isn't just about physical power. You don't have to keep getting hurt to prove anything. Inko nodded in agreement, her voice soft as she added, and real friends don't hurt each other, Izuku. Not like this. Quietly, their son admitted something else. He called me a Deku because I'm quirkless. Izuku whispered, his voice muffled from where he hid in his father's chest. The word, though soft, hung heavily in the air. Izuku, Hisashi said firmly, though his voice remained gentle, you are noticeless. Not now, not ever. No one has the right to call you that. But... Izuku's voice trembled as he looked down at his hands. He's right. I don't have a quirk. I can't do what he does. I can't be strong like Kaken. Why does it matter? Hisashi said. Izuku's head snapped up toward him, his eyes wide with shock. The boy was crying again. His cheeks were streaked with tears, his small body trembling, big and fat tears rolling down his cheeks. His breath hitched, and he looked at his father like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Why does it matter what he says about you? Hisashi continued. Izuku's lip quivered as he stared at his father. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Because. He wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to hold back the sobs that were threatening to overwhelm him. Because without a quirk, I am useless. Everyone thinks so. Kaken and the others. You're not, Hisashi said simply, his voice taking on a firmer tone, the gentleness slipping away. Frankly, he'd had enough of Izuku getting bullied like this. His son needed to learn. He needed to be strong enough to face the eyes hardened, and he stood up, his posture rigid. Izuku, still sitting on the bed, looked up at him in confusion. His eyes widened, a flicker of distraught washing over his face, but he didn't dare move. His arms were still lifted, waiting for the comforting embrace he was suddenly deprived of. Papa? He asked softly, his voice small, almost trembling. Hisashi didn't look down at him. He stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. No son of mine is a Deku, he said. Izuku flinched. Hisashi's next words came like a challenge. Prove it. Izuku blinked, his heart sinking. Prove it? Hisashi turned toward him, his gaze sharp. Prove to me that you're not a Deku. Show me that you're not weak. That you can stand up for yourself. Show me your strength, Izuku. The room fell into a heavy silence. Inko watched, her eyes wide with concern, but she remained quiet, unsure of how to intervene. She knew Hisashi's frustration had been building, but this was different. Her mouth opened to speak, but Hisashi met her eyes and shook his head. There was a lesson to be learned here. Izuku sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. Prove it? He didn't understand. What was he supposed to do? How was he supposed to prove that he wasn't weak when the one thing he lacked, his quirk, was the very thing that seemed to make him weak in everyone's eyes? Tears welled up again, but this time, Izuku tried to hold them back. He felt hot and warm all over, and there was a tightening feeling beginning to grow in his chest. Izuku stammered, his voice breaking. I don't know how. Hisashi sighed. Without saying another word, he extended his hand toward Izuku. Come on, he said curtly, his tone still sharp. It's time to go home. Izuku stared at his father's outstretched hand, his mind racing. His small hand trembled as he reached out to take it, desperate for some sense of reassurance, some small gesture of comfort. He squeezed his father's hand tightly, hoping, praying, for something. Papa doesn't squeeze his hand back. Izuku sat alone during recess, his notebook open in front of him, but his pencil barely moving across the page. His usual scribbles about heroes and quirk analysis were absent, replaced by a few faint, unfocused lines. The weight of his father's words still clung to him, a heavy fog that clouded his mind. Prove it. He didn't know how. And every time he thought about it, his chest tightened with that same uncomfortable feeling from the night before. His pencil slipped from his fingers, rolling off the bench and onto the ground. "Oi, Deku!" Kaken's voice rang out, cutting through Izuku's thoughts like a sharp blade. Izuku flinched but didn't look up. He could feel Kaken's presence drawing closer, along with a couple of other boys who usually trailed after him, snickering at whatever Bakugo said. "You just gonna sit there, scribbling in that stupid notebook all day?" Bakugo sneered, stopping in front of Izuku and glaring down at him. "What are you writing? More notes about how you're going to be a hero? Don't make me laugh. Anytime a villain's gonna go through you, you're just gonna run to your daddy." Izuku kept his eyes fixed on the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the familiar sting of tears welling up again, but he fought them back. "Not now. Don't cry now." Kaken didn't wait for a response. He bent down and snatched the notebook off the bench, flipping through the pages with a bored expression. "Look at this CRP. You think taking notes on heroes is gonna help you, quirkless loser? You can't seriously be thinking about applying Yui, are you?" Bakugo's voice was dripping with disdain, and the other boys behind him laughed. Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't move. He didn't fight back. He never did. "Give it back, Kaken," Izuku muttered, barely above a whisper, his voice trembling. Kaken smirked, holding the notebook just out of Izuku's reach. "Why should I? It's not like you're ever going to use this stuff. You're just wasting your time, Deku." He tossed the notebook to one of his friends, who caught it and tossed it back, the group laughing as they passed it between them. Izuku's stomach twisted into knots as he stood up, trying to grab the notebook from the air. His movements were frantic, but every time he reached out, they threw it just out of his grasp. "You know what?" Kaken said suddenly, catching the notebook in midair. "I'm doing you a favor." "No!" Izuku shouted, his voice desperate as his hand shot up, reaching out in panic. He knew exactly what Kaken was about to do. He was going to use his quirk on the notebook. But this time, something felt different. As the desperation surged through him, Izuku felt a strange warmth filling up his body, starting from his hand and flowing through his body. It wasn't just panic, it was something else, something unfamiliar. Something that didn't exactly feel like his. His breath caught as he watched Kaken try to ignite his quirk. But nothing happened. The notebook remained intact in Kaken's hand, untouched by the usual sparks and explosions that should have lit up its pages. Kaken's eyes widened, confusion flashing across his face. "What the?" he muttered, looking down at his hand as if something had malfunctioned. He clenched his fist, but no crackling explosions followed. He stared at the notebook, then at Izuku, suspicion creeping into his expression. And something else, uncertainty. Izuku stood frozen, his hands still outstretched, his body trembling from the rush of adrenaline. He didn't understand what was happening. Why didn't Kaken's quirk work? Bakugo's eyes narrowed, frustration bubbling under his skin. "What did you do, Deku?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. He stepped closer to Izuku, his fists clenched, but still no sparks ignited. "How did you stop me?" I didn't." Izuku stammered, his voice shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. His heart pounded in his chest, and that strange warmth still lingered inside him, like a pulse of energy he didn't know how to control. He glanced at his own hand, half expecting something to happen, but everything felt normal. For a moment, Bakugo just stood there, his gaze locked on Izuku, searching for some explanation. The other boys behind him exchanged confused looks, unsure of what to make of the situation. "You're lying!" Kaken snapped, taking another step forward, his face twisted in anger. "You think you can mess with me, Deku?" Izuku shook his head frantically, backing away. I didn't do anything, Kaken. I swear." Kaken glared at him, his frustration boiling over as he tried to summon his quirk again, but once more, nothing. The air around them was still, devoid of the usual crackle of explosions that always accompanied Kaken's anger. Katsuki Bakugo was having a shitty day. And it was all that quirkless Deku's fault. The moment he got home, the old hag, his mom, had laid into him, blaming him for that little loser getting hurt. Again, as if it washes responsibility to babysit Deku every time the kid decided to stick his nose where it didn't belong. Katsuki, how many times do I have to tell you? You're gonna hurt someone if you don't learn to control your temper. His mom had yelled, her voice sharp and grating. He hated it. Hated when she looked at him like he was the one causing all the problems. Like he was at fault just because Deku always found a way to get hurt when he didn't even want the kid hanging around in the first place. And now, as he stormed down the street, his fists clenched in anger, Katsuki's mind raced with frustration. Deku had always been a nuisance, always tagging along, always looking up to him with those big, stupid eyes, always thinking, like Katsuki was less than him. Like he looked down on him even if he was taller. It made his blood boil. He didn't want Deku around. He and his friends didn't ask for the kid to join them when they were playing, and they definitely didn't need him getting involved. But Deku just wouldn't stay away. It was like Hugh and Teto get hurt. And now the old hag blames me, Katsuki muttered under his breath, the frustration bubbling up again. He kicked a loose can on the sidewalk, sending it flying. Like it's my fault Deku's a weakling. But today was worse. Katsuki's usual irritation had been mixed with something else, confusion. And that only made things worse. When he tried to burn Deku's notebook, his quirk hadn't worked. It was the first time in his life he'd felt something like that, helpless. The thought made him grind his teeth. What the hell is going on? He muttered to himself, his fists sparking faintly as he clenched them harder. He'd felt the usual surge of power when he activated his quirk, but when he tried to blow up Deku's notebook, nothing. No explosion. No flames. Just nothing. Deku, he growled under his breath, his anger twisting inside him. What did you do? I swear, Kaken. Izuku exclaimed, his voice trembling as he held his hands up defensively. I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened. Katsuki's glare intensified, his teeth grinding as his fists clenched, but still, the expected explosion didn't come. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as they watched, some looking concerned while others whispered amongst themselves. Stop lying! Katsuki snapped, his voice low but furious. He took a step closer to Izuku, his eyes blazing with frustration. You're hiding something, aren't you? You did something to my quirk. I didn't, I swear. Izuku pleaded, his voice cracking as he tried to explain. I don't even have a quirk, Kaken. How could I? Shut up. Katsuki interrupted, his anger boiling over. He couldn't stand it. The confusion, the humiliation of his quirk failing him in front of everyone, and worst of all, the idea that Deku might have something to do with it. The cafeteria's attention made it worse. Katsuki could feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting for something to happen. His pride was burning and he had no way to release it. Deku, he growled, his fists shaking at his sides, you're going to pay for this. Kaken, please. Izuku stammered, backing up even more. I didn't do anything. I don't know what's happening either. Before Katsuki could respond, a teacher's voice cut through the tension. Bakugo, Midoriya. Both boys froze as Mr. Sato pushed through the crowd, his expression stern. The crowd quickly dispersed, students and bystanders moving away from the scene as the teacher approached. Katsuki clenched his fists tighter, his jaw set, but he didn't say anything as the teacher glared down at them. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, Bakugo, the teacher said firmly. Whatever is going on, you're not going to solve it like this. Izuku let out a shaky breath, his heart still pounding in his chest. He glanced nervously at Katsuki, who stood rigid, his anger barely contained. Both of you, back to class. Now, the teacher commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Shaking with anger and humiliation, Katsuki stomped back to his class, his fists still clenched tightly at his sides. Every step felt like an explosion waiting to happen, but his quirk was still acting strange. How the hell did that happen? He thought, teeth gritted in frustration. He had never felt so powerless before, especially not in front of Deku. The quirkless loser had done something, even if he swore he hadn't. There was no other explanation for why his quirk is failing. The weight of the crowd's stares and the teacher's scolding still burned in his chest. Katsuki wasn't used to feeling out of control. And now, in front of everyone, he had been made to look weak. His footsteps echoed loudly in the hallway as he tried to clear his mind. The frustration kept bubbling up, the anger twisting inside him with no outlet. Deku, Katsuki thought bitterly, his fists shaking harder that it's his fault. The humiliation gnawed at him, making him feel smaller despite the rage swelling in his chest. I'll show him. Katsuki knew that whatever happened today wouldn't be the end of it. Next time, there wouldn't be any confusion or weakness. He'd prove once and for all that he was stronger than everyone else, and Deku wouldn't stand in his way. As he reached the door to his classroom, Katsuki paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. His classmates would see the anger on his face, but he couldn't let them see the doubt. No one could know what had happened, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone think Deku had gotten the better of him. I'm the best, Katsuki reminded himself, pushing the door open with more force than necessary. He walked in, ignoring the curious glances from his classmates, and headed straight for his seat, slamming his bag down on the desk with a loud thud. No one said a word, sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Katsuki sat down, gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Next time, he thought, his eyes narrowing as he stared ahead. Next time, Deku's going to know exactly who he's messing with. He doesn't see Izuku Midoriya till the walk home after class. As he made his way down the familiar path home, he spotted Deku standing by the stoplight at the crosswalk, his small figure hunched and still. The green light on the walk sign was already blinking, urging pedestrians to cross, but Deku didn't move. He just stood there, frozen as though something was weighing him down. Katsuki narrowed his eyes, his frustration from the day bubbling up once more at what's he doing now? But then he sees it. Tiny sparks. Tiny sparks coming out of Izuku Midoriya's hands. Faint but unmistakable, tiny sparks flickered from Deku's trembling hands. Katsuki's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened as he stared at the faint glow coming from Deku's fingers. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things that no way. But it was real. Those tiny sparks danced and flickered around Izuku's hands, just like the ones Katsuki had seen countless times when he used his own quirk. Except this wasn't his quirk, it was coming from Deku. Katsuki's fists clenched at his sides, his heart pounding. Anger surged through him, hotter and fiercer than before. He looked at his own hands and willed for his quirk to activate. Nothing. He was. And then he saw it. Deku had spotted him. Deku's eyes went wide with fear, as though he realized what Katsuki had just discovered. He fumbled awkwardly, his hands instinctively darting behind his back, trying to hide the sparks that had danced from his fingers just moments before. But it was too late. Katsuki had seen it. Katsuki's mind raced, a storm of confusion, anger, and disbelief swirling inside him. But one thing remained clear, one word, cutting through everything else like a knife. Thief. Kakakin, Deku stuttered, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes wide with shock. He could see the fury in Katsuki's expression, could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a flame about to ignite. Give it back, Katsuki growled, his voice low and dangerous. His fists shook at his sides, still refusing to spark, and the humiliation only fueled his anger. His quirk wasn't working. Deku, the quirkless loser, had somehow taken it. Deku stared at him, his breath catching in his throat. What? I didn't. Kakin, I don't know what. Shut up. Katsuki roared, his voice cracking with rage. You stole it. You took my quirk. His eyes were wild, filled with a burning intensity that made Izuku freeze on the spot. Izuku felt guilt gnaw at his insides, twisting his stomach into knots. Thief. Kakin had called him a thief. And even though Izuku had no idea what was happening, had no control over the strange sparks that had come from his hands, Kakin's words made him feel like it was all true. He had a quirk. After all these years, after being reminded constantly that he was weaker, different, less than everyone else. Now, suddenly, there were sparks dancing from his hands, and Kakin, who had always been so strong, was standing there, powerless. I don't know how. I don't. Izuku mumbled, backing away slowly, his mind racing. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't understand it himself. But Kaken wasn't listening. His world had narrowed down to one simple, painful truth. Deku had something fat-belling Eto him. The rage bubbling inside him boiled over. "I said, give it back," he shouted, lunging forward. You villain." Izuku flinched, stumbling backward, his mind in chaos. "Kaken, I swear, I didn't mean." Katsuki's fists were shaking, his eyes burning with the intensity of someone who had been betrayed. "You didn't get to have a quirk, Deku, you didn't get to take what's mine." Izuku's heart pounded in his chest, guilt and confusion swirling together. He didn't know what was happening, why he had a quirk now, why Kaken's quirk wasn't working, but the weight of Katsuki's words pressed down on him like a lead blanket. Kaken's about to hit him. No, he was going to kill him for stealing his quirk. This, Izuku knows. So he does what comes first in mind later. He will wonder why was this what came first to his mind? He runs. "Give it back." Kaken roars, chasing after him. "I don't know how." Izuku screamed back, stumbling over his feet as he bolted down the street. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind spinning with fear and confusion. How could he give back something he didn't even understand? A car honked loudly, the blaring noise sending a shock of adrenaline through him. Izuku barely had time to glance sideways as a car swerved to avoid them, tires screeching on the asphalt. The vehicle nearly clipped him, the force of the air from its speed brushing against his skin as it sped past. "Watch it," the driver yelled, but Izuku didn't stop, didn't look back. His legs were burning, his heart thundering in his chest, and he could hear Kaken's footsteps right behind him, gaining on him. There was no escape. Izuku could feel it, Kaken's anger, his need to take back what he thought was stolen. And as much as Izuku wanted to explain, he didn't even know how to begin. "Why do I have a quirk?" The question echoed in his mind, mixing with the fear that Kaken was going to catch him, going to hurt him, maybe even worse than he ever had before. "Why do I have Kaken's quirk?" "I didn't do anything," Izuku shouted over his shoulder, his voice cracking with desperation. "I don't know what's happening." But Kaken wasn't listening. His mind was set, and his anger was blinding. All he could see was that Deku, weak, quirkless Deku, had something that didn't belong to him. "I'll make you give it back, Deku." Katsuki roared, his voice hoarse from the effort of chasing him. Izuku's chest tightened with panic, and he ran faster, his feet barely staying under him as he dodged another pedestrian, the world blurring around him. But no matter how fast he ran, the guilt and confusion clung to him like a second skin. He didn't know what was happening, why everything had suddenly changed. All he knew was that Kaken's rage was real, and it was chasing him, relentless and unforgiving. Izuku tore the door open, slamming it shut behind him with a bang that rattled the walls. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs trembling from the frantic sprint. He barely registered his father's surprised voice calling out, "Izuku," as he raced past, his mind too consumed by the terror and confusion swirling inside him. He didn't stop. He didn't think. He just bolted straight to his room, slamming the door shut and locking it with shaky hands. The click of the lock was barely audible over the pounding of his heart. He pressed his back against the door, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, his chest heaving with every breath. For a moment, everything was quiet. The sound of his heartbeat echoed in his ears, drowning out the world. His mind raced, replaying everything that had just happened. Kaken's furious face, the sparks from his own hands, the chase, the accusations. "Thief," the word echoed in his head, making his stomach twist with guilt. How could he explain something he didn't even understand? He hadn't stolen Kaken's quirk, he didn't even know how to see quirk, let alone take someone else's. But that didn't matter. Kaken had been ready to hurt him, no, kill him. The look in his eyes, the rage behind his words. Izuku knew that if he hadn't run, something terrible would have happened. Someone would have gotten hurt. His hands were trembling as he stared down at them. Again, sparks came about. Loud and bright, just the same way it's always been whenever Kaken uses his quirk. How did this happen? A knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. "Izuku!" His father's voice came through the door, muffled but filled with concern. "Izuku, What's going on? Are you okay? Izuku's breath hitched. He didn't know how to answer that. He wasn't sure if he was okay. Izuku, opened the door. His father's voice came again. For a moment, Izuku hesitated, his fingers hovering over the lock. He didn't know what to say. How could he explain what had just happened? How could he explain the fear and guilt eating away at him? I have a quirk. I shouldn't. Before he could make a decision, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by a familiar voice, filled with rage. Where is he? Katsuki's angry scream rang out, making Izuku flinch. His father's voice, calm but stern, tried to intervene. Katsuki, wait. But Katsuki couldn't be stopped. Deku, he bellowed, his voice closer now, the fury in his words unmistakable. Izuku's heart pounded in his chest. He scrambled away from the door, retreating to the far side of his room, his body shaking as Kaken's voice grew louder. He could feel the rage seeping through the walls, the threat of violence lingering just outside. Izuku! His father's voice sounded more urgent now, a note of panic slipping through as the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Footsteps thudded through the house, growing closer by the second. Izuku pressed his back against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. His breath came in shallow, quick gasps. Where is he? Katsuki's voice was closer now, just outside the door. The handle rattled violently as Katsuki tried to force his way in, slamming his fist against the wood. Come out, Dad. You can't hide forever. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. His father's voice rose in the background, but all Izuku could focus on was Kaken's rage, so raw, so terrifying. But it was Izuku who stopped Kaken from blowing up his notebook, humiliating the boy in half of the student body. Izuku, who had stolen his quirk. Give it back. Katsuki roared, pounding on the door again. I know you're in there. You can't steal my quirk and hide like a coward. Silence. Then, Katsuki's breath was ragged, his fists still pounding on the door. Has stolen me quirk. I know he did. That thief. His voice cracked with a mixture of rage and desperation. Izuku's heart sank at Kaken's words. His papa was going to think he was a thief, too. The realization settled over him like a heavy weight. Izuku was a thief. I don't. Izuku's hand gripped his chest tightly, his fingers clutching at his shirt as though it would stop the pounding in his heart. His eyes were wide, panic and guilt battling inside him as he pressed himself closer to the door. I didn't mean to, he screamed, his voice trembling. I don't know how to give it back. There was a moment of silence, the air thick with tension. Izuku! Hisashi called out again, his voice sharp but laced with concern. His tone was calm, but there was urgency in it. He needed answers. Katsuki, on the other hand, wasn't calming down. Come out, Deku, he demanded, his fist slamming against the door again. You stole it. You took me quirk, and I'm going to… Enough, Katsuki! Hisashi's voice boomed, cutting through Kaken's rage. The pounding on the door stopped for a moment, the heavy silence that followed making Izuku's heart race even faster. Izuku, open the door, Hisashi said more gently this time, though the worry was evident in his tone. Tell me what's going on. Tears welled up in Izuku's eyes as he tried to steady his breathing, his mind racing. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He didn't even understand what had happened. I don't know how. Izuku whispered to himself, but the words didn't feel like enough. His papa, Kaken, they both thought he'd done something terrible, and even though he didn't understand it, the weight of that truth made him feel smaller than ever before. On the other side of the door, Katsuki's breathing was still heavy, but he wasn't pounding anymore. The tension in the air was thick, the silence between the three of them stretching on. Izuku, Hisashi said softly but firmly. Whatever is going on, we'll figure it out. But you have to open the door. Izuku's hand hovered over the lock, his fingers trembling. He wasn't sure if he could face them, his father, Kaken, after everything. He wasn't sure he even knew how to explain what he was feeling. But slowly, hesitantly, his fingers turned the lock. Hisashi stepped inside. He didn't look furious as Izuku had feared. Instead, his brows were knitted with concern, his eyes searching Izuku's face and body for any signs of harm. Without hesitation, Hisashi gently grabbed his arms, lifting them slightly as he looked him over from head to toe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and steady, though his worry was evident. Izuku shook his head, his lips trembling. His father's touch felt safe, grounding him, but the guilt still churned inside his chest. "Show me." Izuku's gaze flicked nervously from Katsuki, who stood behind his father, fists still clenched and eyes burning with barely contained rage, then back to his papa. Hisashi's eyes were steady, filled with worry but not judgment, and it gave Izuku the courage to move. Slowly, Izuku raised his trembling hands in front of him, unsure if the sparks would return. For a moment, nothing happened, just the quiet stillness of the room. But then, faint and flickering, the tiny sparks began to dance along his fingertips, just like before. His father's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but he didn't pull away. He kept his hands on Izuku's arms, steady and calm. Katsuki, however, wasn't calm. "See," he barked, his voice harsh and accusatory. "He stole it. That's my quirk. That quirkless loser stole it from me." Hisashi glanced at Katsuki, his face still composed despite the outburst. "Katsuki, enough." His voice was firm, the kind of tone that made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any more accusations without understanding what was really going on. Izuku's breath hitched as he stared at the sparks, his heart hammering in his chest. I don't know how this is happening, Papa," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I didn't steal anything. I'm good." Hisashi's eyes flicked from the sparks to Izuku's face, and Izuku heard something, then, a familiar phrase his papa tells him on the occasions where Izuku gets in trouble. "Good boys don't ask how to be good." He didn't say it out loud, but Izuku could see the thought behind his papa's ruby eyes. Izuku flinched at the familiar phrase, one that was often said around the house, a constant reminder of his father's expectations. He swallowed hard, the guilt swelling inside him like a storm. Hisashi kept staring at Izuku's hands, a quiet intensity in his gaze. "All right," Hisashi murmured, his voice low. "Now give it back." Izuku's eyes widened. "But..." "Izuku," Hisashi's voice cut through the fog of Izuku's thoughts, growing more stern, his eyes locking onto his son's with an intensity that made Izuku's chest tighten. "How did you get it?" Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to think. What happened? His mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation. What had he done? How had this all started? He remembered. His hand was up. He had raised it to stop Kaken from destroying his notebook. There had been this feeling, a strange, unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was deeper than that, something inside him pulling, demanding that something change. His heart pounded as he recalled the exact moment. The memory was hazy, but there was one thing that stood out. It was April. That's what it felt like, deep in his chest. A force that tugged at him, like he was reaching for something that wasn't his but was somehow within reach. And then, before he knew it, the sparks had started, flickering at his fingertips. They hadn't been there before, but somehow, he'd taken them. He didn't mean to. He didn't even know how, but in that moment, something had happened. "I had my hand up," Izuku stammered, his voice shaky as he forced the words out, his eyes still shut tight. "There was this feeling in my chest. It was like a pull." His voice trembled as he tried to explain something he barely understood. "I don't know how, but it felt like I was reaching for something." Hisashi's gaze didn't soften. If anything, the sternness deepened, though he remained quiet, letting Izuku speak. "I didn't mean to, Papa," Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to take anything, but it just happened." Kaken's fists clenched tighter at Izuku's confession, his eyes narrowing. "So you did steal it, Deku," he snarled, stepping forward, but Hisashi quickly raised a hand, stopping him from getting any closer. "Katsuki," Hisashi said in warning, his voice calm but commanding. Kaken huffed, but he didn't move, his frustration boiling under the surface. "Okay," Hisashi said quietly, his voice contemplative, as if he was piecing together something in his mind. He glanced down at Izuku, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he slowly raised his gloved hand. "Let's try something." Izuku hesitated, his heart still racing, but he nodded. His father's calm, measured tone gave him a sliver of reassurance, even though the fear of the unknown still gnawed at him. With a trembling breath, Izuku raised his hand, mimicking the motion he'd made earlier, the same way he had when it all started. Just like before, Hisashi instructed softly, his eyes never leaving Izuku's face. "Focus on what you felt when you said there was a pull. But this time, I want you to stop if you feel it again. Don't reach." Izuku's breath hitched as he slowly lifted his hand, fear and confusion swirling in his chest. His fingers twitched, the memory of those tiny sparks still fresh in his mind. He didn't want to do this, he didn't want to hurt anyone or steal anything. But his father's presence grounded him, keeping him steady. Katsuki stood in the background, his glare sharp, but he didn't move. His fists were still clenched, but he watched with a mix of frustration and wary anticipation. Izuku took a deep breath, focusing. He tried to remember the exact moment when it had happened, the feeling of something pulling from within him, like an invisible force reaching out. His mind focused on the sensation, but this time, he was more cautious. He didn't want to repeat what had happened before. For a moment, nothing happened. His hand remained still, no sparks, no strange energy. But then, just as he had feared, he felt it again. The pull that it was faint at first, but it was there, an invisible thread tugging from somewhere deep inside him. "I feel it," Izuku whispered, his eyes wide with realization. "Stop," Hisashi said gently but firmly. "Don't follow it. Izuku, you have topish instead." Izuku's heart raced as he screwed his eyes shut, trying to focus. He wanted to follow his father's instructions, to push whatever that strange pull was out of his body, but the sensation was overwhelming. It was like trying to stop a river with his bare hands. It kept surging forward, relentless. The feeling was almost familiar as Izuku stood there, trembling and trying to push against the pull. He realized it wasn't entirely foreign. It felt like something he had experienced before, like the gnawing sensation in his stomach when he was too thirsty or when he hadn't eaten after a long day. It was hunger. But this wasn't a hunger for food or water. This pull, this strange force inside him, felt like a hunger for something else, something deeper, something essential. And the more he tried to resist it, the stronger the sensation became, as though the pull was trying to consume, to take from what was around him. "I can't," Izuku stammered, shaking his head frantically. His breath quickened, and he looked up at his father, his wide eyes filled with fear. "I don't know how to stop it. It's too strong." Hisashi nodded, solemn and focused. "All right," he said quietly, his mind clearly working through the situation. He reached out, grabbing Katsuki's hand despite his immediate protests, and then gently took Izuku's trembling hand on his own. "I don't want to touch Deku," Katsuki snapped, his voice full of defiance. "Hush," Hisashi interrupted firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Both boys fell into an uneasy silence, though Katsuki scowled, and Izuku's hand trembled in his father's grip. Reluctantly, they complied, their hands clasped together, the tension between them palpable. "Now, Izuku," Hisashi said, his voice more determined than before. His eyes bore into his son's, calm but insistent. "Try again. Feel into Katsuki's quirk, the way you did before, and push it out. Don't pull, just push." Izuku's breath hitched as he nodded slowly, his heart still racing. He closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of Katsuki's hand in his. The pull was still there, deep within him, like an instinct, like the gnawing hunger he had felt before. But this time, he concentrated on it pulling. Instead, he focused on pushing. He concentrated on the sparks he had seen before, the power he had felt surging from Kaken earlier in the day, then to him. He could almost sense it now, lingering just beneath the surface of his skin, like a flickering flame. But instead of pulling it toward him, like before, Izuku tried to imagine it flowing back into Katsuki's hand, returning to its rightful place. For a moment, nothing happened. Izuku's hands trembled, the pull growing stronger, urging him to take. But then, with a deep breath, he focused harder, on pushing it away. Suddenly, something shifted. "Keep going," Hisashi encouraged, his grip firm but reassuring. You're doing it. Izuku's face scrunched in concentration as he felt the energy flow. Slowly, steadily, he pushed the feeling back, forcing the quirk out of his body and back into Katsuki's. He could feel it like a weight lifting, like a flow of energy reversing its course. Katsuki's fist sparked. This time, the explosion was small but real. There! Katsuki exclaimed, his voice a mixture of anger and shock. It's working! Izuku opened his eyes, sweat trickling down his forehead. He could feel the pull coming back up, the hunger rearing. Almost like it wanted the quirk back. Hisashi nodded, satisfied but still cautious. Good. You're getting control, Izuku. Katsuki ripped his hand away the second he felt the quirk return fully, scowling. Don't you ever do that again, Deku, he snapped, glaring at Izuku. If you try to steal my quirk again, I'll... Katsuki, enough, Hisashi said, cutting him off sharply. This isn't something Izuku meant to do. Katsuki gritted his teeth but didn't argue further, still shaking with barely contained frustration. Izuku, breathing heavily, looked down at his hands. The pull was still there, faint but manageable. He had done it. He had pushed the quirk back. I didn't mean to, Izuku whispered, his voice shaky. I'm sorry. Hisashi's gaze softened for a brief moment, but his words came out firm, almost automatic. Good boys don't steal other people's quirks. Izuku flinched at the familiar phrase, the words cutting deep even though he knew his father didn't mean them in the cruelest way. But still they stung. He wasn't a bad person. He didn't want to steal anything, least of all Kaken's quirk. But that's what it felt like, didn't it? Like he had taken something that wasn't his. Kaken's glare didn't help. You better not steal from me again, Deku, he muttered under his breath, his fists sparking again now that his quirk had returned to him. Izuku's shoulders slumped as he nodded weakly, guilt gnawing at him. I won't, he whispered. I promise. It will never happen again. Present. Izuku Midoriya sat at the back left of the class, near the window. He came early with all might, since the hero was now also the school's newest teacher. His thoughts raced as he stared out the window, watching the early morning light spill across the school grounds. His real quirk, Polarize, had been quiet. But even so, Izuku could still feel its faint presence inside him, like an itch in his hands that he couldn't quite scratch. Who in their right might thought it was a good idea to send him off to a high school filled with powerful quirks? He had no one to blame but himself. Izuku wants to be a hero. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of his desk as the door opened again. His heart sank as he saw who entered. Kaken. Izuku grimaced, his body tensing as Katsuki Bakugo walked through the door, his usual scowl etched onto his face. The air around him practically crackled with his explosive energy, a warning to anyone nearby to stay out of his way. Izuku quickly averted his gaze, hoping to go unnoticed. Kaken's presence was always a storm waiting to happen. Ever since the incident with their quirks, ever since Izuku had taken something from him, even accidentally, the tension between them had been palpable. Izuku knew Kaken still didn't forgive him. The look in his eyes that night, the anger and betrayal, haunted Izuku's thoughts. Katsuki's gaze briefly swept across the classroom, his eyes landing on Izuku for a fraction of a second. There was no acknowledgement, just a flicker of annoyance before Kaken turned away, heading to his seat. Slowly, more students began to trail into the room, their chatter filling the space as they settled into their seats. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure of themselves and their quirks. The ease with which they moved, joked, and interacted with one another made Izuku feel a little out of place. Take your feet off that desk now. The sudden shout jolted Izuku out of his thoughts, and his eyes wandered back to where the commotion was happening. Kaken. Another freshman had marched up to Katsuki's desk, glaring at him with ferocity. The boy, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and standing tall with a serious expression, looked like he wasn't about to back down. Kaken, of course, looked completely unfazed. His feet were casually propped up on the desk, his posture relaxed as though he hadn't just been called out. He smirked, a spark of amusement lighting up his eyes as he stared at the other boy, clearly enjoying the confrontation. And who the hell are you? Kaken drawled, his voice laced with disdain. You got a problem with me, Four Eyes? The other freshman's expression didn't waver. I have a problem with you disrespecting this prestigious school and the desk that countless students before us have used to strive for greatness. His voice was firm, full of conviction. Izuku winced internally. He knew that tone, and he knew that it wouldn't sit well with Kaken. Kaken's smirk grew wider, more dangerous. Prestigious, huh? Looks like you're way too uptight for your own good. He swung his legs down from the desk but stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving the other kids. Let's start over, said the other boy. I'm Ida Tenya from Semi-Private Academy. Kaken raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Semi-Private Academy, huh? Never heard of it, he said dismissively. His eyes gleamed with amusement, as though Ida's formality was nothing more than a joke to him. Ida didn't falter. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the country, he said firmly, his voice resolute. I came to Yui because I wish to become a hero who follows the rules and upholds justice. Midoriya couldn't help it, he snorted. He hadn't meant to, but the combination of Ida's rigid formality and Kaken's dismissive attitude made the sound slip out. It was small, barely audible, but it was a mistake. Instantly, Ida's head snapped toward him, his serious expression tightening. What? He demanded, his voice sharp with surprise and mild irritation. His glasses caught the light as he twisted fully to face Midoriya, his posture as straight and intense as ever. Midoriya's heart jumped into his throat, and he immediately regretted making any sound at all. Nothing. Nothing really. He waved his hands frantically in front of him, his face turning red from embarrassment. I didn't mean. You clearly found something amusing about my statement, Ida said, eyes narrowing, his voice stern. Please, enlighten me as to what was so humorous. Kaken, watching the exchange, smirked. Yeah, Deku, he added, his voice dripping with mockery. Go on, let's hear it. Midoriya panicked. No, he stumbled over his words, his face flushed as he tried to backtrack, but Ida's intense stare didn't falter. Laughing at the idea of becoming a hero who upholds the rules and justice is no small matter, Ida said firmly, pushing up his glasses as if to emphasize the weight of his words. A hero must possess both strength and a sense of duty. Midoriya felt like shrinking into his seat. I didn't mean to laugh at that. He took a deep breath. Now really wasn't the time to talk about what he thinks. I'm sorry, he said simply. Before the situation could get any worse, the door slid open. His gaze shifted abruptly from Kaken to another student who had just entered the room, a girl with long, sleek black hair that reached down to her waist and bright hazel eyes. She walked with an air of calm confidence, her expression composed as she glanced around the room. There was something commanding about her presence, like she was used to people paying attention when she entered a room. His mind, ever the analyst, immediately kicked into gear. Emitter type, Izuku thought instinctively, assessing her demeanor and quirk energy. A powerful one. And then, to his horror, he felt the familiar sensation rising sluggishly within him. The fuel that it was faint but unmistakable, a hunger that stirred at the sight of her quirk energy joining the mix of their classmates. Izuku quickly squashed the feeling down with a metaphorical smash, just as he had practiced. He couldn't afford to lose control here, not now. Good morning. Ida's voice cut through the quiet, his formality returning full force. He seemed to recognize the girl, and he bowed slightly as he introduced himself. My name is Ida from Semi-Private Academy. It's a pleasure to meet you. The girl turned her attention to Ida, smiling warmly. Kirigaya Rin, she introduced herself with a polite nod. Izuku glanced at her again, taking in her composed demeanor. Kirigaya Rin. I know you, one of the students growls, ruby-red eyes glaring straight to her soul. How the hell did you beat me at the practical exam, huh? Rin blinked, caught off guard by the sudden hostility. Her mind raced, but her response came out dry and automatic, before she had time to think. By participating, she said, her tone casual, though her face flushed slightly from the unexpected attention. Her gaze drifted from Ida, who was watching the scene with concern, to the blonde boy in front of her, Katsuki Baku. It wasn't a hard guess. She had seen the sheet posted outside the classroom earlier, the one that listed their student rankings. Katsuki Bakugo was first overall, but she had beaten him in the practical exam by a couple of points. And apparently, that was the wrong thing to say. Bakugo's glare intensified, his fists clenching at his sides, knuckles white. The crackling sound of his quirk sparking faintly filled the air. Participating? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. You think you can just waltz in here, beat me by 4 points, and act like it's nothing? Rin stood her ground. She hadn't expected her response to set him off like this, but now she could see it, his pride, his rage at being beaten, especially by someone who wasn't even trying to make a big deal out of it. Great, it was her first day and she's already made someone mad at her. Look, I didn't mean, Rin started, but Bakugo wasn't listening. Don't act so casual. Bakugo snarled, his voice rising as the other students started to watch the confrontation unfold. You think you're better than me, huh? I'm gonna show you exactly where you stand, Kurigaya. The intensity in his eyes sent a shiver down Rin's spine, but she squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. I'm not trying to start anything, Rin said calmly, though her heart pounded in her chest. I just did what everyone else did. He said grumpily. He sits back down to his chair in one big motion, arms folded. Rin stood at the front of the classroom, awkward and uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes from Bakugo's yelling. Her eyes slowly drifted across the room, taking in the faces of her classmates, some curious, some amused, seemingly entertained by the unfolding drama. And then, to her horror, she made eye contact with someone, a boy with messy green hair and even greener eyes. He wasn't scrutinizing her, exactly, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her stomach flip. It wasn't judgmental, but it was intense, as if he could see right through her, as if he were staring straight into her soul. Orphanage. Oh God, she saw the name Todoroki on the class sheet. Was he here too? Right now? Endeavors, the top 2 hero of Japan's son? Rin wanted to melt into the floor. Great, she thought, suppressing the urge to sigh. This is just perfect. Despite the situation, Rin kept her expression as neutral as possible. She wasn't about to let Bakugo see that she was nervous. Kurigaya, Ida called out. You realized there was something more in the exam, didn't you? Rin frowned. She walked towards her seat, 13, trying to roll off Bakugo's outburst. What? She asked curiously. You must be very perceptive, Ida continued. As a student, you are far by more superior than me. Rin's eyebrows shut up by surprise. I think you're selling yourself short, she says. We hardly know each other, it's only the first day. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff now. Rin's mouth snapped shut. Similarly, Ida rushes back to his seat. Welcome to Yui's hero course. Rin's head snapped toward the front of the classroom. There, standing with an imposing yet calm presence, was their teacher? In a sleeping bag? His tired eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable, but his voice carried weight. The students immediately fell silent, a mix of excitement and anxiety settling over them. Aizawa Shota, Eraserhead, the boy next to Rin murmured, his voice low but animated. Quirk, erasure. He can nullify other people's quirks just by looking at them. No wonder he's an underground hero. He doesn't have to rely on flashy powers. I'm surprised he teaches at Yui. His voice continued in an excited murmur, clearly lost in his own thoughts as he spoke. Rin blinked, realizing she had been staring at him during his entire spiel, as she thought, suddenly feeling awkward. Oh no. The boy suddenly noticed her gaze and stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened slightly, as if only now realizing that he had been talking out loud, and he quickly clammed up, his cheeks turning a faint shade of pink. Hi. He says, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Rin's eyes widened. Hi, she said quickly, waving her hands slightly to dismiss the awkwardness. You don't have to stop, she stammered out. I didn't mind, I just, you seemed really into it. Talking. It was interesting. He blinked, clearly caught off guard by her response. Oh, thanks. Midoriya. Kurigaya. Quit talking to each other, Izawa called out. Both students froze, then immediately straightened up in their seats, their backs rigid as if an invisible force had pulled them upright. Rin's face flushed with embarrassment. Izawa's gaze lingered on them for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly before he continued addressing the class. If you're here to socialize, you're in the wrong course. You've got enough challenges ahead without distractions. Rin swallowed, glancing quickly at Midoriya before fixing her eyes back on the front of the room. Midoriya, too, looked straight ahead, his expression determined, though she could see the faint trace of nerves still lingering on his face. Everyone, come up here and grab your gym uniform. As Rin grabbed her new uniform in awe, she couldn't help but wonder, were they in the sleeping bag with him? Turns out they weren't heading to orientation like most students on their first day. Instead, Izawa led them outside and straight to the gymnasium, where they were greeted by an open field and an array of equipment laid out ominously. Rin exchanged a confused glance with Ochako, her curiosity piqued but nervousness creeping in. Izawa stopped in front of them, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Forget orientation," he said flatly. "You're here to become heroes, so we're skipping the formalities. Today, we're doing a quirk assessment test." The class collectively tensed at his words, the weight of what that might mean settling in. "A quirk assessment test?" Rin whispered under her breath. Izawa continued, holding up a device that resembled a stopwatch. "You've been using your quirks all your lives, but today, I'm going to see how well you can use them under pressure. You'll be tested on various activities, throwing, running, endurance, and you'll be using your quirks for each task, 8 tasks in total." "And what happens if we fail?" someone in the class asked. Izawa's eyes narrowed. "Whoever comes in, blast." His voice dropped, cold and calculated. "Will be expelled." "What the foo? Bakugo!" Izawa calls out, "You managed to get the most points in the entrance exam. What was your farthest distance throw with a softball when you were in junior high?" 67 meters, I think." Izawa nodded thoughtfully, his eyes calculating. "Right?" he said, tossing a softball to Bakugo. "Try doing it with your quirk this time." The class watched as Bakugo caught the ball easily, the smirk on his face widening. The prospect of showing off his quirk in front of everyone, especially in a challenge, clearly made him very excited. He walked over to the marked circle where the test would take place, flexing his fingers as tiny sparks of explosions crackled from his palms. Bakugo tossed the ball up a few times, rolling his shoulders, the anticipation growing. "Stand inside the circle and don't step out of it," Izawa instructed, watching him closely. "Use everything you've got." The rest of the class, including Rin, leaned forward slightly, watching intently. Bakugo's confidence was impossible to miss. Bakugo positioned himself, his eyes narrowing as he prepared. Then, in a single swift motion, he hurled the ball into the sky with a fierce explosion from his palm, sending it soaring into the distance with a loud boom. The force of the blast left a trail of smoke, and the ball shot far beyond the boundaries of what anyone expected. The class stared in awe as the ball disappeared into the horizon. The class collectively gasped at the distance, but it was Rin's voice that cut through the moment. "Diamond," she said out loud, unable to hide her astonishment. A few heads turned her way, and Bakugo's smirk widened, clearly enjoying the reaction. "Yeah, that's what happens when you're the best," he said, his tone dripping with smugness. Izawa, however, remained unaffected by the spectacle. He turned his attention back to the rest of the students. "Next," he called out, his voice sharp and focused. She needed to use her quirk to her advantage. But how? Slowly, the rest of the students began to step forward and do their throws. Ida used his engine-powered legs to launch his throw with incredible speed, sending the ball flying with precision, though not as far as Bakugo's explosive distance. Uraraka's turn was met with quiet awe. Her quirk, which could make anything defy gravity, sent the softball floating endlessly into the sky, effectively giving her an infinite score. Yet, Izawa remained indifferent, simply taking note of her quirk's unique capabilities. Some students with quirks less suited for long-range attacks struggled, like Kaminari, who tried to channel electricity into his throw but only ended up with an awkward mid-range result. Others, like Todoroki, holy shit he's so cute, made their marks silently but impressively, his ice quirk adding an intense elemental force to his throw. All the while, Rin watched closely, trying to gauge where she might fit into the mix. It would come down to how she applied her quirk under pressure. Finally, Aizawa glanced in her direction and threw the ball towards her. "Kirigaya, you're up." Rin took a deep breath and stepped forward, her nerves buzzing. All eyes were on her now. She glanced at the softball in her hand as she walked into the circle. She wasn't exactly a bad pitch, but she had to incorporate her quirk into it somehow. But did she? Now wasn't the time for indecisiveness. Biting her lip, she threw the ball out with her diamante hand, putting all her weight into it. As it sailed through the air, Rin's quirk activated subtly. A pulse of purple energy flared briefly from her hand, bonding the molecules in the air around the ball to create a subtle, solid disc beneath it, boosting the throw slightly. The ball flew farther than she had anticipated. She could see it disappear into the distance, and her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and relief. She honestly thought she was gonna slice the thing into pieces. Aizawa glanced at the reading on the device in his hand, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. 170 meters, he said, his tone neutral. Rin exhaled, relieved. It wasn't anything near Bakugo's impressive 700 range, but it was more than what her middle school 49m throw. "Midoriya Izuku." Aizawa's voice rang out, the full use of his name making the class turn their heads toward the green-haired boy. Izuku, Rin thought. What a pretty name. But something else tugged at Rin's thoughts as she watched Midoriya step into the circle. She had recognized his name earlier. There were only 2 slots open for recommendation students per class, and Izuku Midoriya had taken one of them. The other? Todoroki Shudo. Rin glanced briefly at Todoroki, who stood silently off to the side, composed and distant as ever. Everyone knew Todoroki's name. He was practically famous in hero circles. But Midoriya? She had never heard of him until today. No rumors, no stories about his quirk, no connection to any prominent hero families. How did he get in on recommendation? The question nagged at her. In a world where connections and power were everything, Midoriya had somehow slipped through without anyone noticing. And yet, here he was, standing in front of everyone. Rin's curiosity deepened as she watched closely, waiting to see what kind of power had earned Midoriya one of the coveted recommendation slots. But as the seconds ticked by, Midoriya's hesitation became more obvious. He gripped the softball tightly, his expression torn between anxiety and determination. Rin's earlier question remained unanswered, and now she was left wondering if Midoriya was hiding something, or if he was about to fail spectacularly. Aizawa's sharp gaze flickered toward Midoriya, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Any time now," Aizawa called out, his tone calm but laced with the subtle warning that there would be no more leniency. Rin watched as Midoriya took a deep breath, and in that instant, it was like something inside him shifted. The nervousness that had plagued him moments before seemed to evaporate, and his entire demeanor changed. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and his once soft green eyes hardened into sharp, laser-like focus. It was like watching a completely different person. Rin felt her breath catch in her throat. What just happened? The transformation was almost unnerving, like all the fear, anxiety, and self-doubt had been burned away, leaving only pure determination in its wake. Midoriya's grip on the softball tightened for just a moment longer, and then, without a word, he pulled his arm back, sparks of green lightning swirling around him, and hurled the ball with everything he had. For a split second, there was silence. And then, the ground around Midoriya shook, a massive burst of energy erupting from his fingertips just as he let the ball fly. The force sent shockwaves through the air, and the ball shot off into the distance with an incredible velocity, tearing through the sky like a bullet. Gasps erupted from the class, and Rin's eyes widened in shock. Where did that come from? Aizawa checked his device, his expression neutral. 805 meters. The class went completely still. 805 meters, a full 100 meters farther than Bakugo's throw. Midoriya breathed heavily, lightly flicking his hand as if it pained him, but the fire in his eyes remained. He had done it. From their peers, Rin hears the words, "stupid," and thief, her eyes instinctively went to the source, but she couldn't pinpoint who said it. Most importantly, she couldn't figure out why they said it. But it didn't matter, Rin thought. Midoriya had just proven something, shifted something, though it was still unclear what. Rin didn't know if she liked it or not. The next set of tests weren't any less difficult. The next one was a quick dash. Rin's quirk allowed her to create molecular structures, but speed wasn't exactly her strength. She did her best to generate small platforms to propel herself forward, but it wasn't as smooth or fast as she had hoped. She crossed the finish line breathless, her mind racing with ways to improve her technique. Next came the grip strength test, where students were expected to show raw physical power. Quirks came into play again. Kirishima's hardening quirk gave him an edge, while Mina's acid quirk allowed her to melt through the obstacles easily. Bakugo's explosive grip crushed the competition, and his smirk only grew with each passing victory. This time, Rin couldn't think of a way to get around her as each task grew harder, the weight of that reality bore down on her and her classmates. One of them, or maybe even more, were about to get kicked out. By the time they reached the final test, the students were drenched in sweat, their muscles burning from the relentless exercises. The atmosphere was tense, each student now fully aware of what was at stake. With a sigh of relief, Rin allowed herself to relax upon seeing that she placed 12th. You worked hard today, but... Aizawa paused, scanning their faces. The whole expulsion thing? It was a bluff. The room went silent for a beat. The tension that had been sitting in everyone's chest, the fear of failing and being sent home on their very first day, evaporated in an instant. The silence quickly gave way to a flurry of reactions, shocked gasps, groans, and a few sighs of relief. Seriously? Someone shouted from the back, clearly frustrated at having been put through the emotional ringer. That's not fair. Kaminari complained, throwing his hands in the air, while others, like Ochako, let out small giggles of nervous relief. Rin's shoulders sagged as she released the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She exchanged a look with Ochako, who was practically glowing with relief. Aizawa, unaffected by the chorus of reactions, raised a hand for silence. This was a test of your resolve. If the threat of expulsion is enough to break you, then you don't belong here. The class fell silent again, absorbing his words. You're all still here because you showed me something today, Aizawa continued, his tone firm. But don't think for a second that it'll get easier. This was just the beginning. Aizawa's gaze narrowed, as though daring anyone to challenge him. Some of you will be tempted to slack off now that you've made it past the initial test, he continued. Don't. If you think surviving one day at UE means you're ready for the world outside these walls, you're mistaken. Rin felt a flicker of anxiety rise in her chest. She had done enough to stay, to avoid being expelled. But was it really enough? The uncertainty clawed at her, mingling with the fatigue that gnawed at her bones. Aizawa's voice softened, just slightly, but it carried a weight that none of them could ignore. You're here to become heroes. The path ahead isn't easy, and it won't be forgiving. The world doesn't care about your quirks, your dreams, or how hard you're willing to work. You'll have to prove yourself every single day, and for some of you, that might not be enough. Silence followed his words, and for a moment, Rin thought she saw something almost like regret flicker in his eyes. It passed quickly, his usual stoic demeanor snapping back into place. But if you can't handle that, Aizawa finished, you're free to leave any time. Rin clenched her fists, the purple light briefly flaring at her knuckles. She wouldn't back down. Not now. The ceremonial bell rang, its sharp chime echoing through the room, signaling the end of the PRD. Around her, Rin heard a wave of simultaneous sighs of relief from her classmates. The tension that had been hanging in the air since Aizawa's speech seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Man, that was intense, Ochako murmured from beside her, rubbing her temples. I thought I was going to pass out during that last exercise. Yeah, Rin replied quietly. But we made it through, right? She felt the subtle thrum of energy in her fingers again, the purple hue flickering briefly before she clenched her hands into fists. She had made it this far. But that was all it was, just the first step. She had been so happy about getting into UE, but now that she was here, She needed to get it together. She needed to remember her goal, her dreams of becoming a loved hero. You okay, Rin? Ochako's voice broke through her thoughts, concern lacing her words. Rin forced a small smile, shaking off the heaviness in her chest. Yeah, but a lot to take in. Ochako smiled warmly. I know what you mean. But hey, we're here. That counts for something, right? You're free to go to your next class, Aizawa mentions. I believe you have English next. English. But she hadn't even realized how much time had passed. Around her, the other students began to pack up, some with sluggish movements, others chatting quietly as they filed out of the room. English class with present Mike. That'll be interesting, right? Ochako grinned. At least we'll get a break from all the intensity. I could use something more lighthearted. Rin nodded. She stood, shouldering her bag, and followed the others to their next class. The halls were bustling with students moving from one class to the next, the air thick with the excitement and exhaustion of their first day. As they walked, Rin found herself falling into step with Ochako. Present Mike was sure to bring a different kind of energy to the class, but Rin couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled over her after the earlier session. Aizawa's words echoed in her mind. This was just the beginning. Hey, Ochako said, pulling Rin out of her thoughts. You think Present Mike will make us do anything wild today? I'm hoping it's just a regular lesson. I don't think I can handle anything too crazy after Aizawa-sensei's class. Rin gave a small smile, trying to push the lingering doubts away. As they approached the classroom, the muffled sound of Present Mike's booming voice reached them through the door. Rin exchanged a glance with Ochako. It seemed like the next PRD was going to be anything but quiet. All right. Present Mike's voice could be heard loud and clear as they entered the room. Who's ready to learn some English? Let's go. Rin sighed, but this time, it was almost in relief. At least Present Mike's enthusiasm would keep her mind off the intensity of the earlier class, even if only for a little while. She sat next to Midoriya-san, well, more like deflated into her chair. They shared a look, and he grimaced, nodding that I'm tired too, he seems to say. Rin couldn't help but chuckle softly, the shared exhaustion between them easing some of the tension from earlier. It was oddly comforting to know she wasn't the only one feeling like they'd been through the ringer today. Between the intensity of Aizawa's training and the overwhelming pressure of their first day at UE, it was no wonder they were all running on fumes. Present Mike, of course, didn't seem to notice or care about the collective exhaustion in the room. He was practically bouncing at the front of the class, his grin as wide and loud as ever. All right, listeners. Present Mike shouted, clapping his hands together. I know you've all had a tough morning, but it's time to switch gears. We're diving into the wonderful world of English. A few groans rose from the class, but Present Mike powered through, undeterred. Now, who's ready to practice their pronunciation? How much energy does this man have? Rin muttered. What was that, Kirigaya? He asked curiously, his voice carrying across the room with his usual enthusiasm. Rin blinked, startled out of her thoughts by Present Mike's sudden attention. Rin hadn't even realized she'd muttered anything under her breath, but before she could respond, Present Mike raised his hands and began signing in Japanese Sign Language along with his words. Oh, by the way, listeners, my quirk's given me some tough side effects. If you want me to hear you in class, you better speak up. Rin froze for a moment, processing what he said. She hadn't known about the side effects of his quirk. It made sense, though. Someone with a voice as powerful as Present Mike's probably had to deal with the consequences of such a loud quirk. She quickly straightened in her seat, feeling a little flustered by the attention yet again. I'm sorry, Present Mike-sensei, she said and signed in tandem, louder this time, giving him a polite nod. I was just, thinking about something else. Present Mike gave her a wide grin, his hands still moving in tandem with his speech. No worries, Kirigaya. Just make sure to stay with us. English can be tricky, but it's all about keeping up the energy, right, class? The room filled with a mix of half-hearted agreements, the fatigue from earlier still lingering in the air, but Present Mike's energy didn't wane in the slightest. He continued his lesson making sure everyone was engaged. Midoriya poked her gently with his pencil, pulling Rin's attention away from present Mick's energetic lesson. Rin blinked, looking over at him. You know Giselle? He asked, his voice low enough not to disturb the rest of the class but filled with curiosity. Rin nodded, keeping her voice just as quiet. Yeah. The orphanage makes us learn a secondary language to be a better pick for adoption. She paused for a moment, her gaze briefly dropping before continuing. I figured if I wanted to be a hero, I might as well learn something of service. Midoriya's eyes widened slightly, impressed by her thoughtfulness. That's really cool, Rin. I think that's a great idea. Rin offered him a small smile, though her words carried a hint of bitterness. Thanks. It's not like it worked or anything. But at least I got something useful out of it. She glanced back toward the front of the classroom, watching as Present Mike continued signing with effortless ease while delivering his lesson. Midoriya's expression softened as he studied her for a moment, clearly wanting to say something more but unsure of how. Instead, he just nodded, offering quiet support as they turned their attention back to the class. Rin appreciated his silence. She didn't need pity or reassurances. She'd learned long ago that the world didn't hand out happy endings easily. But she had found a way to channel her experiences into something that might make a difference. If learning JSL helped even one person, it was worth it. Can you teach me? Midoriya asked quietly, his voice soft but sincere as he glanced at Rin. Rin blinked, a bit surprised by the request. She hadn't expected that. But looking at Midoriya's eager face, the familiar spark of determination in his eyes, she could tell he genuinely wanted to learn. A small smile tugged at the corner of Rin's lips. Sure, she replied, her voice gentle. I can teach you the basics. It's not too hard once you get the hang of it. Midoriya's face lit up with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. I really want to be able to help everyone, you know? And this could be another way to do that. Rin nodded, appreciating his genuine longing to learn something new for the sake of others. It'll take time, but I think it'll be worth it. We can start during lunch if you want. Midoriya beamed, nodding, the excitement already returning to his tired eyes. Soon enough, English 2 came to an end, the final bell of the PRD ringing through the classroom. Present Mick's enthusiasm didn't wane, though. He gave them all an exaggerated salute as the students began packing up their things. All right, listeners. That's all for today. Keep practicing, and remember, communication is key, both in English and as heroes. Present Mike called out, flashing the class a bright smile as they filed out of the room. Rin stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder as she stretched her stiff muscles. The soreness from earlier still lingered, but the change of pace from English class had helped ease the tension in her mind, if not her body. Next to her, Midoriya was packing up his notebook with the same speed and focus as always, though he shot her a quick grin. Lunch next, right? Maybe we can start that JSL lesson? Rin chuckled lightly, nodding. Yeah, we can start with the basics. As they made their way out of the classroom, Ochako caught up with them, her face bright despite the long day. Are you two planning something fun for lunch? She asked, clearly curious. Hi, by the way, I'm Uraraka Ochako. Rin's going to teach me some Japanese sign language, Midoriya explained, smiling. I'm Midoriya Izuku, it's nice to meet you. Ochako's eyes widened with interest. Oh, that's so cool. Can I join in too? I've always wanted to learn another language. Rin smiled at their enthusiasm. Sure, the more the merrier. As they walked toward the cafeteria, Rin felt a little more at ease. Despite the weight of everything they had gone through today, Aizawa's intense speech, the pressure of being at UA, the constant push to prove herself, there was something comforting in the simplicity of this moment. Teaching something, sharing knowledge, felt like a small step forward. Rin snorted into her bento as she watched Midoriya mirror her sign for hello with the straightest, most expressionless face she had ever seen. His hands were precise, but his blank expression made it all the more amusing. Try smiling, she said, half teasing, half helpful. Midoriya blinked, his serious facade faltering for a moment. He quickly attempted a smile, though it came out as more of an awkward grimace. Rin would have laughed, however, as she observed him. A thought crept into her mind. Now that she really thought about it, she hadn't seen him genuinely smile or look excited throughout the entire day. And it was their first day of school at UE. Then again, Midoriya did get in by recommendation, Rin reminded herself. Maybe that was weighing on him, knowing that others had fought their way in through the entrance exam, while his acceptance came through another path. Or maybe it was something else. Midoriya's eyes widened as he looked at her, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and worry. Is there something on my face? Am I smiling wrong? What? Rin blinked, suddenly realizing she'd been lost in thought while staring at him. No. I was just staring, Ochako quipped. Rin's face flushed a little, caught off guard. I wasn't staring, she protested, though the heat rising to her cheeks suggested otherwise. I was just thinking. About Midoriya's face? Ochako teased again, raising an eyebrow. Rin groaned, rubbing her temples as Midoriya's face turned red as well, clearly embarrassed by the exchange. It wasn't about his face. I was just. Never mind. She quickly waved her hand, trying to push the topic away. Ochako giggled, clearly enjoying herself. I'm just kidding, Rin. Midoriya let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his head. It's fine. Really. I was just worried I might have done something weird. No. I was just. Rin shook her head quickly, trying to find the right words. You're a recommendation student, right, Midoriya? How did you get in? Her eyes widened almost immediately after the words left her mouth. Wait, that was too forward. I'm just curious. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. Midoriya's eyes blinked in surprise, and for a second, there was an awkward silence between them. Rin mentally kicked herself for bringing it up. She hadn't meant to sound intrusive, just genuinely curious about him. But Midoriya smiled, though it was a bit sheepish. No, it's okay. Actually, I did get in through the recommendation exam, he admitted quietly, scratching the back of his head. Oh, no wonder you were able to beat Bakugo's score earlier. Ochako said. Rin waited for a moment, wondering if Midoriya would say more about his journey into UE, but when he didn't continue, she decided to let the conversation drop. She could tell he wasn't comfortable delving too deeply into it, at least not right now. With a small smile, she shifted back to the task at hand. All right, let's get back to the JSL lesson, she said, her voice light and encouraging. We left off at hello, but now I'll show you how to sign thank you. It's pretty simple. Midoriya and Ochako both leaned forward, watching her closely. This is thank you, Rin explained, demonstrating the motion. Ochako immediately tried to follow along, copying the sign with a determined expression. Thank you, she repeated, her hands moving carefully. Perfect. Rin smiled, feeling a little more at ease now that the focus was back on teaching. Midoriya tried the sign next, his face still a bit serious but clearly focused. Like this? Rin nodded. Exactly. They practiced for a few more minutes, with Rin showing them more basic signs, like please and goodbye. The light-hearted mood returned as they laughed over their mistakes and shared in the small triumphs of getting the signs right. Half the class stared in awe, their eyes wide as the towering figure entered the room. Dressed in his iconic Silver Age costume, with its vibrant red, white, and blue colors gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stood none other than All Might, Japan's #1 hero. Rin had to bite her lip to refrain from raising her hand to ask a multitude of questions. Rin could only imagine the time it'll take to grade papers and kick villains' butts on a regular basis. She's sure he's got it figured out. I teach hero basic training, All Might began, his voice booming with confidence and energy. It's where you will train in different ways to learn the basics of being a hero. From rescue operations to combat situations, you'll be put through scenarios designed to push you to your limits and beyond. The room seemed to brighten with his words, an infectious hope spreading through the class, including Rin. She couldn't stop the wide grin spreading through her face even if she tried. Today's training will pull no punches, All Might announced, his voice booming with excitement and energy as he stood before Class 1A. Today, we will be doing combat training. Rin's eyes immediately flew to her hands, a determined expression setting on her face. Combat training, she thought, her mind racing. the weight of what she could do with her quirk pressed on her. She could manipulate atoms, shift them into protective shields and solid structures. But combat against people was different. She had to be faster, more precise, and aware of her surroundings. Mistakes weren't just errors in judgment, they could cost her the fight, especially with the migraines that came with her power. By the way, she really needed to do something about that. All Might's grin widened, and he added, "But remember, one of the keys to being a real hero. I looking good while you do it." There was a beat of silence, and then the entire class erupted in confusion. "Wait, what?" Rin muttered under her breath, glancing down at her current attire, still in her standard uniform. Next to her, Midoriya had a similar look of bewilderment on his face. All Might's laugh rang out. "That's right. Your hero costume." He motioned to a large wall on the side of the training room, which slid open to reveal row after row of sleek, custom-designed hero suits, each one labeled with a student's name. During real hero work, your costume becomes part of your identity, All Might explained. It represents who you are, what your quirk can do, and the image you project to the public. A hero needs to be ready for anything, and their costume is the first step in being prepared. The students' faces lit up with excitement. Each of them had submitted designs for their hero costumes before starting at UA, and now, they were about to see them for the first time. Rin felt her pulse quicken as she approached the rack, her hand brushing over the suitcase that contained her suit. She had spent hours working on it, thinking through every detail to accommodate her molecular quirk. Looking good is part of the job, but remember, All Might continued, his tone shifting to something more serious, functionality is key. Your costume should enhance your abilities, not just make you look cool. In today's training, you'll get to put them to the test. Now, head over to change to your hero costumes before going to ground beta. Giddy, the students of Class 1A hurried over to the lockers to change to their hero gear. Rin practically rips the suitcase open and threw the suit on, eyes shining upon seeing the familiar violet hue of her quirk sewed into the hems. The suit was basically a tracksuit, sleek and flexible to allow for maximum mobility. Dark purple accents ran along the edges, a reminder of her molecular quirk and the way it glowed whenever she used her abilities. The fabric was reinforced with lightweight but durable materials, designed to withstand the strain of her quirk without holding her back. She flexed her fingers, watching the faint purple energy spark along her gloves. The suit felt like an extension of herself, comfortable, familiar, and ready for action. She took a deep breath, feeling a surge of confidence as she zipped it up. Ground Beta looked like an abandoned city, a sprawling, desolate landscape filled with crumbling buildings, empty streets, and debris scattered across every corner. The structures towered over the students, their windows shattered, and walls cracked, giving the entire area an eerie, post-apocalyptic feel. It was the perfect training ground for hero work. Rin stood at the edge of the field, taking it all in. She glanced at the other students around her, each one equally focused, their hero costumes gleaming in the muted artificial sunlight. All Might's voice echoed across the field. Ground Beta is designed to simulate real-world urban combat scenarios. Here, you'll face obstacles, ambushes, and unexpected attacks. Your mission is simple. Heroes must rescue civilians and neutralize the villains. Villains, your job is to protect your base and stop the heroes from succeeding. It's all about strategy and teamwork. All Might began calling out names, pairing students together. First up, Team A, Midoriya and Kirigaya as heroes versus Team D, Ida and Bakugo as villains. Rin's eyes widened slightly as she processed the matchup, Midoriya and me against Ida and Bakugo. She quickly glanced over at her partner, Midoriya, who looked equally shocked, his eyes darting between their opponents. Ida's precision and Bakugo's raw power would be a tough combination to face. Midoriya gave her a nervous but determined smile. Looks like we're up first. Rin nodded, pushing aside any lingering hesitation. Yeah, and we're going to have to be smart about it. Bakugo's going to come at us hard and Ida's fast. Midoriya glanced over at Bakugo, who was already grinning like he couldn't wait to blow something up. Kaken won't hold back, Midoriya muttered. Rin frowned. Kaken? Bakugo, Midoriya elaborated. It was a classic rescue scenario. The heroes had to stop the villains before they could complete their objective, which in this case, was setting off a large-scale explosion. Both teams began in different areas. Rin soon found herself alone with Midoriya, walking into the unknown. "We need to play smart," Rin muttered, her eyes scanning the empty hallway. "Bakugo's going to come at us head-on. Ida will probably try to flank us and head straight for planting the bomb. We need to separate them. If we let them team up, we'll be overwhelmed." Rin bit her lip. "My quirk is mostly defensive. I can make shields." "How about other objects?" he asked. "Can you make anything else, like Momo?" Rin hesitated, her brow furrowing as she considered his question. "It's not like her quirk," she explained, her hands flexing as a faint purple glow started to form. "I think I can manipulate molecules to create things, but I've only ever practiced making solid structures, shields, barriers, stuff like that. I haven't really tried making other things in combat. Keeping the objects up for too long gives me migraines." Midoriya's mind was already racing. If you can manipulate molecules, that's huge. Even if it's not like Momo's quirk, you could still create more than just shields. What about obstacles? Things to trip them up, like walls or platforms? It doesn't have to be complicated, just enough to throw Ida off balance. Rin's heart raced as she realized the potential of what he was saying. She had always used her quirk for defense, but if she could create physical objects to manipulate the battlefield, she could use it offensively, even if indirectly. It was risky. Overextending herself always led to migraines, and if she pushed too hard, she might not be able to keep up with any type of relentless attacks. Which is why she needed to head straight to the bomb and defuse it. There was no time to second-guess. "I can try. It's not something I've done much in a real fight, but, yeah, I'll make it work." "There you are. There you are." Kaken hasn't spotted Kirigaya yet. That, and Izuku is sure that Kaken's sole focus was on him. Kirigaya met his eyes and nodded, catching on quickly. Without a word, she turned and moved in the opposite direction, and what a fascinating quirk she has. It was more than just defensive barriers. Rin was already using her quirk to enhance her mobility. As she stepped forward, thin purple discs appeared midair beneath her feet, allowing her to move swiftly and quietly down the corridor, each step lighter than it would have been had she run. She was practically gliding, using the discs as stepping stones to stay off the ground, making her movements almost completely silent. Rin would need to get to Ida first to try to defuse the bomb, but ultimately Izuku knew that her quirk was too defensive and it wasn't the best match against Ida's speedy calves. Not good. She would most likely need help getting through Ida, but for that, Izuku needed to be there. Damn it. That means he needs to defeat Kaken first. "Kaken," says Izuku in lieu of greeting. "I gotta admit, you got a lot of nerve being here, Deku." Kaken growled. "Face it, with a quirk like yours, you're either a thief or quirkless." "I haven't stolen any quirks," Izuku tried to explain, tense. "It's not like that at all." "And you expect me to believe that? After that show you put on during the quirk assessment test," the blonde scoffed. "You better give that quirk back to whoever it belongs to, you BS. Kaken charges, his quirk flaring to life. Izuku braced himself, his mind racing as he calculated the trajectory of Kaken's charge. Just as the blast was about to hit, Izuku sidestepped with a quick burst of movement, narrowly avoiding the explosion. His instincts kicked in, moving him with the kind of precision that came from years of studying how to fight and adapt. The blast hit the ground where he had been standing, sending a shockwave through the air. Silently, he praised that Kirigaya was heading close to Ida's location. Rin had no idea where Ida was. Bakugo was enough of a handful, but without knowing where Ida was, things could get out of hand quickly. Ida's speed could allow him to plant the bomb before they had a chance to stop him, and they couldn't afford to be blindsided. Rin glanced at Izuku, who was focused on Bakugo, trying to keep him occupied. But she knew it was only a matter of time before Ida made his move. Her mind raced. Think Rin. Ida was methodical, strategic. He wouldn't just rush in blindly, he was likely hanging back, waiting for the right moment to strike. But where? She was outside, now, hiding behind a pile of debris. Her eyes scanned over the crumbling buildings and debris around them. It was hard to tell with all the chaos, but then it hit her. Ida would prioritize speed, which meant he'd need open space to get a clear run at the bomb. He was probably positioning himself near a clear pathway, somewhere he could reach the objective with minimal obstacles. Behind her, she hears a flurry of explosions and Bakugo screaming, "Deku!" Rin winced. Rin's eyes caught the sudden flurry of wind, a blur of motion speeding through the simulated city, yet he was faster than anyone else in the class, and before she could even react, she saw him running with the bomb in hand. Her heart raced. Ida's objective, as the villain, was to plant the bomb in a strategic location, just like an actual villain would in a real scenario. The exercise was scored based on how well the villains defended the bomb and how effectively the heroes neutralized the threat. Rin's first instinct was to stop him, to rush in and try to intercept him before he planted the bomb. But then she paused, her mind racing with a different idea. If she attacked now, Ida might still have the upper hand. His speed gave him an advantage, and chasing him down might force her into a situation where she'd have to go on the defensive. But if she waited, if she let Ida plant the bomb, he'd be forced to SWH tactics. He'd have to defend the area, meaning he couldn't just rely on his speed anymore. I can use this, Rin thought, her grip on her quirk tightening. If she knew where the bomb was, she could play a different game, turn the tables and force Ida into a defensive position while she went on the offensive. It was risky and her quirk was no use for it, but it might be her best chance. Rin took a deep breath and stayed hidden, watching Ida as he darted through the ruins, scanning the area for a suitable spot to plant the bomb. She knew that as soon as he placed it, the real battle would begin. Her purple discs glowed faintly in the air around her as she prepared to move, her mind calculating the best possible way to close the distance once he committed. Wait for it. Just a little longer, she told herself, her eyes never leaving Ida. She could feel the tension building, her pulse quickening as the moment approached. And then, just as expected, Ida slowed down, finding a spot near the center of the ruins. He crouched down, placing the bomb carefully where an actual villain might try to plant it. Rin could see the precision in his actions. He wasn't taking any chances, making sure the location was well defended. With a burst of energy, Rin moved, her quirk flaring to life as she launched herself toward him, purple discs appearing in rapid succession beneath her feet. Ida's eyes widened in surprise as he realized she had been watching him the whole time. "Kirigaya," he exclaimed. "It's too late. I've planted the bomb. You have 10 minutes before it detonates and everything around you will be gone." Geez, he definitely was taking this seriously. Rin stopped running, hovering a few feet above the air and a handful of meters away from Ida. They stood in a standstill as they surveyed each other. "I see," Ida began. "Midoriya had you go disarm the bomb as he distracts Bakugo, given my partner's obvious animosity towards him. However, you made a mistake. Your quirk is defensive and is no match against my speed. I will just have to catch you before you get to disarm our bomb." With that, Ida runs straight towards her and lunges to a standing long jump. Rin jumps down from her disc, rolling on the ground. Mildly frustrated, Rin yells at him, "Why are you monologuing?" Ida just laughs in response. "I'm only being a true villain, of course." Any other time, Rin might have found his commitment to the role endearing. But right now, with the pressure of stopping him and disarming the bomb, his theatrics were nothing short of annoying. What if she breaks the bomb? Maybe she could slice it in half? No, she could end up setting it off from cutting up the wrong wire. The bomb was likely designed with enough complexity to make sure brute force couldn't solve the problem. One wrong move could trigger it, and she couldn't take that chance. She needs to get close to and disarm it. She needs to outrun a speedster. Rin quickly summoned her quirk again, forming a series of discs in front of her, spaced erratically in the air. Instead of using them for defense, she used them as stepping stones, allowing her to move in unpredictable patterns through the air. If Ida wanted to chase her, he'd have to follow her chaotic movements, forcing him to slow down and adjust his speed. Ida's eyes narrowed as he watched her. "You think you can get away like that, Kirigaya? You can't run forever." "I'm not trying to run," Rin shot back, leaping from one disc to the next, zigzagging through the air. Taking a deep breath and bracing herself low, she allowed the disc she was on to glide fast towards the bomb. With one final leap, Rin landed just in front of the bomb, her purple discs fading into the air. "Kirigaya!" Ida shouted, charging toward her. His engines roared as he prepared for a final attack, a really fast and undoubtedly strong kick. She wasn't fast enough in setting up a shield. Ida's kick lands directly on her torso, the kick powerful enough to knock her away from the bomb. Not to mention it was painful as F-. Rin rolled around the ground, groaning in pain. She raises her head to see Ida's determined face staring back at her. She was at least the same distance as before she ran straight for it. Their plan didn't work. Ida was too fast. She needed Midoriya. "Du." Izuku's heart pounded in his chest as he narrowly dodged another explosion, the heat from the blast grazing his skin. Kaken was going to kill him. He could feel the raw power in each attack, and the sheer destruction Kaken left in his wake was terrifying. The wall behind him crumbled to dust as another explosion hit, and Izuku realized that, at this point, Kaken lost bomb. Ida didn't even need to plant it. Kaken was blowing everything to pieces without a second thought. "Midoriya!" Rin's voice crackled through the earpiece, pulling him out of his spiral of panic. "I can't get through Ida's defense. Do you have any ideas?" Izuku ducked behind a half-destroyed pillar, breathing, his mind racing as he dodged another blast. He needed to think. Ida's defense was nearly impenetrable, and Rin was holding her own, but she needed help to break through. Meanwhile, Bakugo was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before Izuku got hit if he didn't do something. Neither of them could handle both Bakugo and Ida alone. He had to play to their strengths and outmaneuver them. "Think, Izuku. You faced worse odds." "Kirigaya." Izuku stammered, peeking out from his cover to assess Bakugo's movements. His mind was racing through possible strategies. Ida's speed is his main advantage, but he can't change directions as fast, right? "Right," Rin replied, her voice tense but focused. "He's fast in a straight line, but it takes him a moment to adjust when he turns." "Okay," Izuku said, the beginnings of a plan forming. "I'm on my way. Try to distract Ida for as long as you can." "I'll try," Rin responded, her voice determined. "But what about you? Bakugo?" "Du." Kaken's voice interrupted, closer this time, his blasts shaking the ground around them. Izuku gritted his teeth. "I'm bringing Kaken to the bomb," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Rin's response was immediate. "What? If Kaken was going to act like a bomb, then Izuku would have to treat him like one, unpredictable and explosive, but still manageable if he played his cards right. "Kirigaya, I have a plan. You have to trust me." Another explosion rang out, blasting the building open. Izuku barely managed to roll out of the way, the shockwave rattling his bones. But he kept moving, jumping out to open space. He couldn't afford to stop now. "Okay." Kirigaya's voice crackled through Izuku's earpiece as he caught a glimpse of her and Ida locked in combat. "I trust you." Izuku felt a surge of determination. He had to make this work, not just for himself, but for Kirigaya and their team. She was counting on him. And right now, Bakugo was charging at him with terrifying speed, his explosions ripping through the air. And, just like he anticipated, one of his blasts hits a generator, setting up a sequence of events. The rest of the lights black out. Izuku activates One for All. Kirigaya set up a barrier that prevented Ida from running towards him. "Izukurans!" Kaken screams, "Get back here, you Deku!" Running faster than he's ever had, feeling the power of One for All strain on his bones, Izuku went straight to the bomb and grabbed it. They had exactly 5 seconds left. "Kirigaya! Shield it!" He yells, throwing it up to her. The moment Rin's protective bubble encased the bomb, there was a sudden, soft pop, and the bomb dissolved into a harmless cloud of smoke, signaling the end of the exercise. The violet hue of her shield flickered for a moment before fading away as the smoke drifted into the air. The sound of the smoke bomb was almost anticlimactic after all the chaos of the battle, but it was a clear signal. The heroes had won. They won. "Well done, everyone." All Might's voice boomed as the students re-entered the control room, the atmosphere still buzzing with the energy of the battle. His usual exuberance was slightly tempered, though, as he addressed the group, casting a quick glance at the destruction caused during the exercise. That was, well, Kati fight. He paused, wincing slightly as if the next words were difficult to say. Heroes, you managed to successfully isolate and secure the bomb. However, he hesitated for a moment, his expression growing more serious. Due to the considerable amount of damage done by the villains, especially Bakugo, I declare this fight a tie. Midoriya's eyes widened in disbelief. What? He blurted out, unable to hide his shock. He had been sure their team had won, especially after Kirigaya got the bomb. Bakugo, who was still fuming from his near defeat, let out a frustrated growl. A tie! His eyes blazed with anger. All Might nodded, his face stern as he explained. Midoriya, Kirigaya, you both did an excellent job as heroes, but the amount of destruction caused by the villains would have made the area too dangerous for civilians in a real-life scenario. Heroes aren't just responsible for stopping the threat, they also have to ensure the safety of those around them. The amount of damage done here could have put innocent lives at risk. Midoriya, still reeling from the decision, slowly nodded in understanding. There was an odd look on his face. I see, he muttered, glancing down at the ground. It's not just about stopping the villains. It's about protecting everyone. That's exactly right, All Might said, his voice softer now as he addressed the class. In the field, heroes have to think about the big picture. You may win the battle, but if the cost is too high, it's not a true victory. Also, Kirigaya's quirk may have shielded the bomb, but substantial damage to her shields could hurt her. His usual grin was replaced by a more serious expression as he addressed her directly. Kirigaya, how do you think you would have fared if it were a real bomb? Rin's breath caught in her throat for a moment. The adrenaline from the exercise was still coursing through her veins, but All Might's question brought a harsh reality into focus. She took a deep breath, considering her response carefully. You probably wouldn't have fared as well, Rin admitted, wiping the sweat from her brow. My quirk is mostly defensive, but if the bomb had been real, and if my shields had taken heavy damage, I probably would have gotten an aneurysm or something. She felt Midoriya stiffen beside her. She glanced at her hands, the faint glow of her quirk still lingering. If I use my quirk too much or try to shield against too strong of an attack, it gives me terrible migraines. In a real scenario, that could be dangerous. I wouldn't just be fighting the enemy, I'd be fighting my own limitations. The rest of the class seemed solemn after her declaration. Tokoyami, his dark eyes contemplative, nodded. The strength of a quirk comes with its own costs. The balance between power and endurance is something we all must face. Izuku, still standing next to Rin, glanced at her again, clearly worried. He understood what she meant more than anyone. Quirks could be dangerous, not just for their opponents, but for themselves as well. He himself had experienced the cost of pushing one for all beyond his limits. And now hearing Rin talk about the strain her quirk placed on her mind and body hit close to home. But that didn't seem right. Using their BRH quirks weren't supposed to hurt. It didn't make sense, at least not in the way nature intended. Quirks were a natural part of them, something that had evolved through generations to help humanity survive and thrive. Kirigaya, however, squared her shoulders and gave a small, determined smile. But that's why I'm here. To learn how to manage it better. I know I've got weaknesses, but I'll keep pushing until I can overcome them. Her words seemed to break the tension slightly, a ripple of determination running through the group as they realized they all had something to work on, something to improve. All Might, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward, his expression both proud and serious. Young Kirigaya is right. Each of you has strengths, but you also have weaknesses, limitations you must acknowledge and learn to work around. That's what being a hero is about. You don't have to be perfect, but you must understand yourself and your quirk fully. Izuku arrived home, back in Mustafu, his footsteps slow and hesitant as he walked closer to the front door. The familiar scent of Katsudon, his favorite, immediately hit him, filling the small space with warmth and nostalgia. For a moment, he paused in the entryway, breathing it in, trying to hold onto the comforting smell that reminded him of better days, before everything had changed. It happened when Izuku was 10 years old. His papa was gone, dead. Murdered by Avalanche. Hisashi Midoriya, a man Izuku had looked up to for as long as he could remember, had been caught in the crossfire between the symbol of peace, all might, and a villain, all for one. The news hit like a tidal wave, crashing down and leaving everything in its wake shattered. Izuku remembered the day all too clearly. He had been at school when it happened, sitting at his desk, doodling all might in his hero notebook. His teacher had been explaining something, probably about quirks or math, but Izuku wasn't paying attention. He was lost in his usual daydreams, imagining a future where he was just like All Might, a hero who could save everyone, even with a quirk like Polarize. Then his mother came to pick him up early. Her face had been pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. The moment Izuku saw her, he knew something was wrong. "Mama?" he had asked, voice small, his heart pounding in his chest. Inko didn't answer right away. She just knelt down, pulled him into a tight hug and whispered, "We need to go home, Izuku." Izuku's mind raced with questions on the way back to their home. He kept asking what was going on, but his mother remained silent, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't until they were home, sitting on the couch, that Inko finally told him. "Papa isn't coming home," she said, her voice cracking. There was a fight. A terrible fight between All Might and a villain. Your papa was there, he didn't make it." At first, Izuku didn't believe it. How could his father be gone? Hisashi had always been there, always promising to take care of them, always and forever, he had said. It didn't make sense. The shock soon gave way to grief, and that grief buried itself deep inside Izuku's chest. Tears blurred his vision as he clung to his mother, her own sobs mingling with his. The world felt darker after that. Even though All Might had won the battle, even though the villain had been defeated, it didn't matter to Izuku. His father wasn't coming back. That same day, people arrived at their house, moving quickly and efficiently, packing up their furniture and belongings into boxes. It was a strange sight, watching strangers dismantle the life he and his mother had shared with his father. Each piece of furniture they took away felt like another piece of his father disappearing. Izuku sat there, feeling small and helpless, his heart heavy as he tried to process everything. Another person, a man in a dark suit, jotted notes down on a notepad, his face serious as he asked Izuku questions like, "What's your papa like? Was he kind? What was his quirk?" Izuku flinched at the question. His father's quirk? Hisashi never really talked about it much. He wasn't a hero, just an ordinary businessman who worked hard to support their family. But Izuku remembered the small things his papa could do, lighting candles with a whisper, warming up Izuku with a rumble in his chest and a puff of smoke from his lips. His quirk was breathing fire, Izuku mumbled. He could breathe small bursts of fire. "What's your quirk?" Izuku looked up at the man with wide, green eyes. "Polarize," young Izuku answered. I could borrow, take, and give quirks away." The rest of the day passed in a blur. The movers continued packing up their things, and by the time the sun had set, it was clear that this house, this home, was no longer theirs. Izuku stood in the now empty living room, clutching his mother's hand as they watched the last few boxes being carried out the door. That night, they left for Tokyo. Izuku didn't understand why they had to leave, why they couldn't stay in their home. But the heroes told his mother it was for their safety. That there were things happening, bigger things, that Izuku couldn't know about yet. What did he not know? Why could he not know? But he didn't think it mattered. Heroes were good, and they have reasons why they do what they do. And so they moved. To Tokyo of all places. The bustling city felt like a different world, far removed from the quiet life they'd once known. Everything was louder, busier, and it felt like they were running away from the past. As time went on, Izuku's dream of becoming a hero didn't fade, it changed. No longer was it just about saving people like All Might did. Now it was personal. Now it was about making sure that no one else had to lose someone they loved to villains like All for One, the villain whose plans got his papa caught in the crossfire. It was about making the world a safer place, no matter how much it hurt to carry that burden. He wouldn't let his father's death be in vain. Izuku, is that you? He had twisted the door handle open without thinking, stuck in a haze. His mother's voice called from the kitchen, gentle and full of love. Izuku. Meeting All Might, learning how the villain had left the #1 hero in a great state of weakness, only motivated him even more. Izuku? His mother's voice cut through his thoughts again, this time tinged with worry. Izuku snapped back to the present, realizing he had been standing in the doorway, lost in thought. He quickly shook his head, forcing a small smile as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Why, it's me, Mom, he called out, trying to steady his voice. She had been through enough, losing Hisashi, and now she had to watch her only son step into a world of danger. She's been so supportive, so trusting. The least he could do was pretend to be okay. He was good at that, pretending. Like how he pretended he didn't have a villainous quirk. He walked toward the kitchen, the comforting smell of katsudon filling the air. Inko stood at the stove, her back turned as she stirred the pot. Dinner will be ready soon. How was your first day? She asked again, glancing over her shoulder with a smile, though he could see the concern lingering in her eyes. Did anyone? No, Izuku immediately answers, wanting to get rid of her worry. No one found out. They think I have an enhancement quirk. Everything went by fine. Ha ha ha. Of course everything went fine, young Midoriya. All Might's laughter seemed to shake the walls, and Izuku winced at the sound, though it didn't stop the grin, a real smile, from spreading across his face. All Might! Izuku exclaimed, turning toward the larger-than-life figure who had somehow squeezed into their tiny kitchen. Despite his weakened state, All Might's presence always managed to bring a sense of reassurance and joy to Izuku, no matter how overwhelming everything else seemed. Meeting the man was a wish that came true. Your teachers, most importantly Principal Nedzu, have your safety in mind, All Might continued, his voice lowering slightly, though it still carried that powerful energy. You're in good hands, my boy. Yui is more than equipped to handle any challenges that come your way. Izuku nodded eagerly, his earlier doubts momentarily fading in the face of his idol's unwavering confidence. If All Might believed in him, Ifa thought Izuku could handle this, then maybe he could. Maybe the weight of his secrets, keeping his real quirk from his peers, keeping one for all from his mom, wouldn't be too much after all. Inko, still holding the wooden spoon she had been using to stir the katsudon, turned around with wide eyes. Tashinori-san, you're here? She asked, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. With a puff, All Might, in his more deflated form, gave her a warm smile, his hand coming up in a reassuring gesture. I wanted to check in on young Midoriya after his first day and make sure he was doing all right. Inko's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her motherly instincts were still on high alert. Thank you for looking after him, she said quietly, her gaze softening as she looked at Izuku. It's a lot for him to handle all of this. Izuku felt a pang of guilt at the worry in his mother's voice, but before he could say anything, All Might stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. You have a strong son. He's already proven he has what it takes to handle the responsibility. And with a heart like his, I have no doubt he'll rise to the challenge. All right, Inko said after a pause, turning back to the stove with a small, fond smile. Dinner's almost ready. Why don't you two get the table ready and sit down? I'll bring the food over soon. The duo nodded, quickly following over her instructions. As they worked, Izuku watched Yagi carefully. He didn't look significantly weaker since he last saw the hero, but he couldn't help but worry about any lasting effects ever since he took one for all. Yagi met his eyes and gave him a warm smile. How was your first day of school, my boy? Izuku felt his tense shoulders relax, the knot of anxiety that had been building since morning slowly uncoiling. He smiled back at the older man, the warmth in Yagi's expression reminding him of why he was doing all of this. Good, Izuku replied, his voice soft but genuine. It was a lot, more than I expected, but good. He couldn't help but think back on the intense training with Aizawa, the pressure to keep up with his classmates, and the overwhelming realization that he was really here, at Yui, walking the path to becoming a hero. Yagi nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. That's what I expected. Yui is no easy journey, but you handled it well, young Midoriya. You've already shown great resilience. Izuku looked down for a moment, his smile turning a little shy as the praise settled in. Coming from All Might, those words meant everything. Thank you, All Might. I'm trying to do my best. For everyone. Yagi's expression softened even further, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that went beyond words. You don't have to carry it all alone, you know. Remember, you have your classmates, your teachers, and me. You'll get stronger with time, but don't forget to lean on those around you. We're all here to support you. Mulling over his words, Izuku nodded, though he wondered why the hero was really here. Were they going to train again? Yagi laughed, and wasn't it odd hearing All Might's laugh in this form, and shook his head. Izuku grimaced, not realizing he had asked his question out loud. No, young Midoriya. I just wanted to check up on you. And wasn't that nice? As they settled with Katsudon down on the table, Yagi and his mother made light conversation, the house settling into easy companionship. Izuku couldn't help but feel content. He was at the top hero school in Japan, he was doing his best to learn how to wield one for all with all the support from everyone, and he hasn't felt his actual quirk polarize make any big complaints. Still, as he ate, he couldn't help but flicker his eyes to the empty fourth seat by the table. If only his father didn't have to die for him to get here. Rin ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding the heavy training sack as it swung toward her face. Her body moved instinctively, twisting around in a fluid motion as she felt the rush of air from the sack passing mere inches above her. Without hesitation, she planted her feet firmly on the ground and delivered a sharp punch. Thwack! Her fist connected with solid impact, the force sending the sack swinging back with momentum. She watched it sway for a second, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. Training for Yui was no joke, and she wasn't going to get complacent just cause she got in Class 1A. Rin straightened up, rolling her shoulders to shake off the tension that had built from the dodge. She could feel the muscles in her arms burning from the repeated hits, but the exhaustion only fueled her. She needed to be faster, stronger, and smarter. There was no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes, especially in a world where villains and heroes clashed on a daily basis. She turned, eyes sharp, focused. The purple hue of her quirk, Manilicule, faintly pulsed at her fingertips, ready for her command. Another sack swung toward her, faster this time. Without missing a beat, Rin sidestepped, her movements smooth and precise. She followed it up with a swift uppercut, the force of her strike sending it off course. I figured I'd see you here. A third sack, coming fast from her left, swung toward her with force. Rin caught the movement out of the corner of her eye, her body reacting almost before her mind could fully process it. She twisted on the ball of her feet, her legs sweeping out in a powerful arc. Her foot slammed into the sack with precision, sending it flying backward with a satisfying force. She landed softly, her stance balanced, ready for whatever came next. Her breath came in steady bursts, and despite the intensity of the training, a spark of pride lit up inside her. She activated her quirk, and the familiar vibrant purple glow emanated from her hands as small, shimmering shields materialized in front of her. The sacks slammed into the shields one by one, the momentum absorbed by the solid constructs before bouncing harmlessly away. She had made the little training contraption back when she was 12, upon realizing that Yui was the top school in Japan, and was also the closest hero school to SOSO. There were gears that allowed the sacks to swing around her, and she had theorized that if she hit them hard enough, it would simulate a different attack each time. She had scavenged around for parts, mostly at playgrounds, where she would take broken pieces of swings and slides in order to make her piece to resistance. Listen, Yusuke's voice called out lazily from across the abandoned building. Despite herself, she sent Yusuke a glare. I'm busy. Come on, you just got back from school. Her oldest friend reasoned, Yoshi's already wondering where you are. Rin let out an aggravated sigh. Yoshi was their oldest caretaker, she was also an old hag. The older woman didn't even know Rin got in Yui until after she saw her uniform earlier that day. Her reaction had been one of surprise, followed by a stern lecture about responsibilities and not forgetting where she came from. Rin had tried to explain, but Yoshi had already stormed off, muttering angrily about Rin's ungrateful attitude. "Great," Rin muttered, running a hand through her dark hair in frustration. "Just what I need, another lecture." Yusuke chuckled, leaning against the wall with a lazy grin. "You know, Yoshi, she just wants to make sure you're not forgetting about us now that you're going to be some big-shot hero." "I'm not forgetting about anyone," Rin shot back, more defensively than she meant to. The last thing she wanted was for anyone at the orphanage to think she was abandoning them, especially Haruka-chan. "And I'm not a hero just yet." Yusuke raised his hands in mock surrender, still grinning. I know. But you better go see her before she sends out a search party. You know how she is." Rin groaned, rubbing her temples. "I swear, she acts like we're still kids." Yusuke shrugged. "Well, in her eyes, we always will be. Besides, you know Yoshi. She's tough on the outside, but you getting into Yui probably made her prouder than she'll ever admit." Rin snorted. "Yeah, right," she muttered. Her earliest memory of the woman was seared into her mind. Yoshi standing over her, arms crossed, and telling her how plain she looked. Tan skin, black hair, and hazel eyes, Yoshi had said, with a bluntness that stung even more because Rin was 7. "Who'll take you in? Go dress up." "Fine," Rin huffed, finally giving in. "Let's go before she starts yelling." Plain. That word had stuck with her, becoming a background hum in her thoughts even as she grew older and stronger. She may not be the prettiest or the most appealing, but she still punched and kicked harder than the oldest in the orphanage. Even though apparently she looked like the equivalent of wheat bread. She wasn't the first one from SOSO to become a hero, but she is the first one to get in Yui High. Theonleon. Yusuke clapped her on the back with a grin. "Atta girl. And hey, once you survive Yoshi, we can all celebrate your first day at Yui with some ramen. My treat." "You better not be lying." After a quick stop at her favorite ramen stall, the familiar scent of rich broth and savory noodles filled the air around them. Yusuke had kept his word, treating Rin to a well-deserved bowl of steaming hot ramen. They ate in comfortable silence, both enjoying the brief break from the weight of everything, Yui and the orphanage. With full stomachs and the weight of the day starting to set in, they made their way back to the orphanage. The night had deepened by the time they arrived, the orphanage looming quietly in the distance. Saints Outshining Orphanage wasn't exactly home, but it was where they'd both grown up, where they'd learned to survive. And now, it was where Rin would return after every long day at Yui. Rin's mother gave her up when she was 7 years old. Sent to the orphanage with nothing but a bag filled with clothes and a photo album, Rin learned that day that family wasn't always forever. The album, with its frayed edges and fading photos, was her only connection to the life she'd once known. She would flip through the pages, looking at the pictures of a younger, happier version of herself, but the smiles in those photos felt like a distant memory. Her Hawks bag felt more like a reminder of what she lost than a token of comfort. Rin feels her stomach twist into knots upon entering the orphanage. It was already late. They were almost exactly 5 minutes before curfew, and Rin wanted to hurry back to her shared room with Mei before Yoshi or even Akira spots her. She's been adopted, once, only to be returned a week later after the couple thought they weren't a good match. At this point, Rin could barely remember what they even looked like, blurry faces and vague smiles, already fading into the background of her past. The only thing that remained was the hollow feeling of rejection, a reminder that even when she was wanted, it never seemed to last. Lips pursed, Rin shook her head to clear it. Today was great, it marked a brand new beginning. One that she couldn't afford to mess up. And she wasn't going to. Rin flopped down onto the bed, ignoring Mei's presence, just as Mei was used to ignoring hers in return. It was an unspoken understanding between them, a silent truce of sorts from the downfall of their friendship. Rin let herself sink into the worn-out mattress, feeling its familiar roughness beneath her. The day had been long, exhausting, and her body ached in all the right ways. Her mind, however, refused to settle. She lay there, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of everything slowly pressing down on her. The worn-out springs creaked softly beneath her as she shifted slightly, breathing quietly, trying to let the tension drain away. The faint sounds of the orphanage, muffled footsteps in the hallway, distant laughter from one of the younger kids, filtered into the room, but they were background noise, blending into the stillness. She closed her eyes, taking in the quiet of the night, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel safe. To feel at ease. But even as her body rested, her mind buzzed with thoughts of Yui, and just how long she'll be able to survive in the top hero school. But for now, she let the day's exhaustion take over. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Izuku finds himself up before his mother, leaving early for his second day of class at Yui. The apartment was still, the only sound being the soft rustle of his clothes as he pulled on his Yui uniform. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he couldn't help but glance at his All Might figurine on the shelf, a small smile tugging at his lips. This is what he's always wanted. He was going to become a hero, the next symbol of peace. Taking a deep breath, Izuku grabbed his bag and slung it over his shoulder, moving silently through the apartment. He paused at his mother's door, the familiar sound of her soft breathing coming from inside. He smiled faintly. Ever since he had taken over the mantle of One for All months ago, she had become his biggest supporter, worrying constantly, but never wavering in her belief in him. He feels her quirk almost like it was beneath his own skin, comforting like a blanket, so similar and yet not to his own. Izuku's learned to tone down the pull, as he calls it. And ever since he absorbed One for All, the impulse to take other people's quirks has toned down as well. And yet, outside his house was loud. Buzzing. His quirk is akin to a fog, a soft layer of encompassing mist, or maybe it was an awareness of the fog, with people's quirks as droplets all around him. It was both comforting and disorienting. The sensation was always there, in the background. Nevertheless, much like an actual fog, it was distracting. Though what was even more distracting than the ever-present fog of his quirk was the sight that greeted Izuku when he arrived at Yui that morning. Alatanyoff reporters, packed tightly outside the school gates. Their cameras clicked, microphones were held high, and their voices carried across the courtyard in a constant hum of questions and excitement. The reporters were clearly after one thing: All Might. All Might, can you tell us about your decision to teach at Yui? How do you feel about the current state of hero society? Another called out, leaning over the gate as far as he could. The crowd was relentless, pressing up against the metal gates, their voices mixing into an overwhelming cacophony that filled the air. Izuku hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. He had never seen anything like this before. Not even at the Might Tower. He swallowed hard, clutching the straps of his bag tightly. It was his second day, and already, the presence of the #1 hero as a teacher had drawn an immense amount of attention to the school. For once, he feels eternally grateful that the HPSC decided to keep his family outside of orbit. Izuku steeled his resolve and pushed himself against the crowd. "Excuse me," Izuku muttered, trying to edge past a particularly eager cameraman who was straining to look over the gate. He could feel the camera's lens sweeping over him, and for a brief second, panic flared in his chest. But no one spared him a second glance. All eyes were fixed on the gates, waiting for any sign of All Might. The surge of relief Izuku felt was enough to propel him forward. He pushed ahead, finally breaking through the edge of the crowd and slipping through the gates of Yui. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the noise behind him seemed to dull, and the safety of the school grounds enveloped him. Unsurprisingly, Izuku wasn't the first to arrive in class. As he stepped into the room, he was greeted by yesterday's sight, Aizawa-sensei, or rather, Eraserhead, curled up in the front corner of the classroom, fast asleep in his sleeping bag. The sight of their homeroom teacher sleeping so soundly in the middle of the classroom took Izuku by surprise, but he figured he should just get used to it. He quietly made his way to his seat, setting his bag down and glancing around. The classroom was mostly empty, with only a few other early arrivals trickling in. Izuku sat down and let out a soft breath, trying to ease the tension that had built up from his morning nerves. Another perk from his actual quirk, not using it gave him serious anxiety. He's writing in his journal when Kaminari and Shiro come in, chatting animatedly about something as they walk, their voices filling the once quiet room. Jairu entered not long after, her headphones hanging around her neck as she gave them a casual wave. Mina followed behind, her bright smile and energy lighting up the room as she greeted everyone with a cheery, "Morning." Ochako and Kirigaya walk in together, Ochako's hands moving in precise motions as they practiced Jaiso. Kirigaya gave him a small wave as she sat down in her seat. Izuku observed the room quietly, a small smile forming on his face as he watched his classmates settle in. Even after just one day, there was a strange sense of camaraderie forming between them, despite their different personalities and quirks. Izuku felt Theppel creep around the room, brushing against each of them like a silent observer. It wasn't invasive, more like a background hum, a soft awareness of their unique quirks. Kaken's explosive quirk crackled like sparks in the mist. Ochako's hovered like delicate bubbles, weightless and fragile. And then there was Kirigaya. Her quirk felt precise and sharp, like a series of connected threads in the fog, shifting as she moved. Izuku closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to push the fog to the back of his mind. It wasn't something he could afford to think about right now. Not when there was so much riding on one for all, on learning to control that power without breaking himself in the process. Aizawa awakes from his slumber, standing in his yellow sleeping bag. "Good morning, class." They greet him back in chorus. "Our first task for today is simple, you all need to pick a class representative." The class instantly erupted into a flurry of excitement. "I'm perfect for this," Kaminari shouted, grinning confidently as he raised his hand high. "Yeah, right?" Zero retorted. "You just goof off the whole time. I believe the class rep should be someone who embodies discipline and order." Ida spoke up, his voice serious and his hand chopping through the air in one of his signature gestures. "Someone who can ensure the smooth operation of our class as future heroes." "Like you," Jairu quipped, raising an eyebrow, though she couldn't hide the smirk tugging at her lips. Ida bristled. "Well, I believe we should settle this like the upstanding citizens that we are. Through a vote." "But we hardly know each other," Azui quipped. "How would we know who to vote?" Aizawa let out a long, drawn-out sigh, clearly regretting the decision to let them debate the topic. "Just pick someone already," he muttered, sinking further into his sleeping bag. "You know, now would be the perfect time for everyone to introduce themselves to each other," Izuku muttered. Before anyone could say anything else, Ida stood up from her seat, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the chatter. "Midoriya's right," he declared, his tone confident. "If we're going to pick a class representative, we should at least know who we're voting for. Introductions would be a good start." He sat back down. The room fell quiet for a moment as his words sank in. A few students exchanged glances, and it seemed like the chaos that had been building was finally starting to settle. "Well, that's not a bad idea," Kaminari admitted with a shrug. "Might help us figure out who's got the leadership qualities." "Agreed," someone else said, a girl with jet black hair pulled up in a ponytail, nodding sharply. "It is imperative that we understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. As heroes, teamwork will be essential." A few others murmured in agreement, and the atmosphere in the room shifted as the idea took hold. A proper introduction might not be such a bad way to start. Izuku blinked in surprise, grateful for the support. He hadn't meant to voice his thoughts out loud, but it seemed to have sparked something. There was a brief pause before Jairu stood up, smirking slightly. "Guess I'll break the ice," she said. "I'm Jairu Kyoka. My quirk is earphone jack. I can channel sound waves through these," she said, pointing to the jacks hanging from her earlobes. "And I can also hear pretty much everything, so don't try to sneak up on me." The rest of the class laughed, and the tension began to ease. Slowly, one by one, the students started to introduce themselves, each sharing their names and quirks, with some adding a bit of flair or humor to their introductions. Though as each of his classmates said their piece, Izuku couldn't help but notice a common trend. Everyone was introducing not only themselves but also their quirks. Izuku felt a familiar pang of anxiety creep up on him each time someone mentioned their quirk. Quirks were everything in this world. They were what defined you as a hero, as a person even. And while everyone else had their abilities fully realized, or at least understood, Izuku's quirks was a complicated mess of secrets and responsibility. Kirigaya stood next, her posture confident. I'm Kirigaya Rin. My quirk is manilicule. I can manipulate atoms and molecules, though I mostly just make shields. When it finally came time for him to introduce himself, that same anxiety bubbled up in his chest. His palms felt sweaty, his heart pounding as his turn approached. He tried to steady his breath, glancing around at the faces of his classmates, many of whom were excited to learn more about him since his display of strength during the quirk apprehension test. With a deep breath, he stood, trying his best to keep his voice steady. I'm Midoriya Izuku, he started, swallowing down his nerves. My quirk is called polarize. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to say, the weight of everyone's eyes pressing down on him. I have the ability to copy a weaker version of other people's quirks from a distance, he explained slowly, feeling the tension in the room rise. I can also take them away temporarily to use it. I can give it back, of course. There was a slight pause as his words sank in. His classmates' reactions varied, some looked intrigued, while others exchanged uncertain glances. The concept of a quirk that could manipulate and borrow powers was a heavy one, and he could feel the shift in the room as they tried to process the implications. Wait, so you can copy anyone's quirk? Kaminari finally asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Only a weaker version and not mutations, I think. I've never really tried that. Midoriya clarified quickly, rubbing the back of his neck. I can't use the full power of the quirk I copy unless I take it fully, but it does give me a chance to adapt in different situations. He braced himself for the follow-up questions, his heart pounding, hoping they'd understand. Dimin, that's like really good for team-based hero work, Kirigaya acknowledged, her eyes flicking toward Midoriya curiously. Like in the Avengers. Izuku blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. Oh, thanks, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Who's the Avengers? Uraraka asked. This seemed to trigger something within Kirigaya. The girl's body turned to face her friend, eyes alight with excitement. Oh my god, I need to tell you about the MC. Wait, I thought you had some sort of enhancement quirk? Azui mentioned. My uncle, Izuku could consider All Might as a wayward family member, right? My uncle gave me his quirk a couple of months ago so I could have a main quirk to use here at Yui. Wow, that's really nice of him. Azui nodded. Izuku flinched at the sound of Kaken scoffing loudly across him. Are you sure he gave it to you? Kaken sneered, his arms crossed as he leaned back in his chair. The accusation in his voice was sharp, cutting through the friendly atmosphere that had started to build in the room. Instantly, the classroom's mood shifted. The once light-hearted discussion about quirks and teamwork was now clouded with tension. Everyone's eyes slowly turned toward Kaken, and then to Izuku, who stood frozen behind him. Wait, you mean like stealing a quirk? Kirishima asked, his brows furrowing as he looked between Kaken and Izuku, clearly confused. His tone wasn't accusatory, more curious than anything, but it added to the weight of Kaken's words. Izuku's heart sank. I didn't steal it from him, Izuku said quickly, his voice quiet but firm. His palms began to sweat. Kaken's lips curled. Sure. Whatever you say, Deku. The tension hung thick in the air as the rest of the class exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what exactly was happening between the two. Kirigaya, sitting nearby, frowned as she watched the exchange, her eyes flicking between Kaken and Izuku, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. There's no reason to throw around accusations like that, Aizawa's voice rang out, his tone cool but firm. Yeah, seriously, Ochako chimed in, her eyes narrowing at Bakugo. Why are you even saying that? Kaken scoffed again. Because he stole mine. Obviously not, Kirigaya argued, her voice calm but sharp. Izuku glanced up towards her, surprised by her sudden defense. Kirigaya's eyes were steady as she looked directly at Kaken, unfazed by the tension in the room. Otherwise, you'd be screaming about how he took it, she continued, her tone unwavering. Like how you screamed when you tied against us yesterday. A few students in the class exchanged nervous glances, while others tried to hide their smirks. Kaken's defeat during the training exercise was still fresh in everyone's minds, and Kirigaya had just hit a nerve. Bakugo's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "You want to repeat that, Kirigaya?" His voice was low, dangerously calm, but there was no mistaking the anger simmering beneath the surface. Kirigaya didn't flinch. "I'm just saying," she replied coolly. "If Midoriya really stole something, especially something as big as a quirk, you wouldn't be talking about it. You'd be losing your mind, just like how you lost your mind yesterday when things didn't go your way." Izuku felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He hadn't expected her to come to his defense so fiercely, and it left him feeling both relieved and a little in awe. He glanced at her again, noticing the way she stood her ground with calm confidence, her hazel eyes steady as she faced down Kaken. Kaken turned to face her. "You're going to lose something right now if you keep going," he growled, his voice low and threatening. Before the tension could escalate further, Aizawa's tired voice broke through, cutting the rising hostility in the room. "That's enough. We're trying to find a class representative, stop arguing with each other." He didn't even bother to get up from his sleeping bag, his tone carrying enough weight to silence the brewing confrontation. Kirigaya's eyes narrowed as she glanced at Kaken, her defiant gaze meeting his glare head-on. She let out a huff, crossing her arms in frustration but not backing down entirely. Izuku watched the exchange, unsure whether to feel relieved or worried. He appreciated her stepping in, but Kaken's temper was dangerous, and he knew this wasn't the end. "Good," Aizawa muttered, seemingly satisfied as the tension simmered down. "Now back to the task at hand. You're all here to become heroes, not to bicker like children." There was a murmur of agreement, though the energy in the room had shifted significantly. Some of the students were still casting cautious glances at Kaken and Kirigaya, who both sat with arms crossed, eyes avoiding each other. Izuku glanced at Kirigaya again, catching her eye. She gave him a small smile. The rest of the class seemed to have simmered down as well, and Yaoyuzo, a girl he had recognized from the recommendation test, introduced herself next. After the entire class introduced themselves, Ida, taking initiative, stood to hand out tiny pieces of paper for them to vote in. Soon enough, everyone had placed their votes in the little container Ida had set up at the front of the classroom. The atmosphere felt lighter, the earlier tension mostly forgotten as the students quietly whispered among themselves about who they thought would make the best representative. By the end of their homeroom, the results were clear. Ida had won the position of class representative with 4 votes, with Yaoyuzo coming in a close second, making her deputy. The cafeteria buzzed with lunch break chatter, trays clattering, and laughter ringing from every corner. The smell of freshly prepared food wafted through the air, and students of all courses gathered in groups, chatting about the morning classes. Rin, Uraraka, and Midoriya had claimed their spot by the large windows, a comfortable spot where the sunlight streamed in warmly. The trio sat close together, each with their bento boxes open, but their focus was less on eating and more on something else entirely. "Okay, so last time I taught you how to sign the basics. Today, we'll go over something more useful," Rin said, setting down her chopsticks and wiping her hands. She always got a little more animated when teaching. There was something about sharing knowledge that lit up her eyes. Uraraka, sitting cross-legged in her chair, leaned in excitedly. "What's next?" Midoriya, scribbling a few notes in his ever-present notebook, perked up, clearly eager to learn more. He set his pen down, ready to focus entirely on the lesson. "Yeah, I've been practicing what you taught us last time. I think I'm getting the hang of it." Suddenly abashed, Rin gave them a lopsided smile. "Well, actually, there's this thing called sign names that I thought was a good idea." Midoriya's eyes lit up in curiosity. "Sign names?" Uraraka leaned in, equally intrigued. "What's that?" Rin was about to explain when a shadow loomed over their table, and the trio looked up to see Ida standing there, his posture as rigid as ever. He adjusted his glasses with a swift motion, his serious expression softening just a bit as he addressed them. "Kirigaya," Ida started, his voice filled with formality as always. "I couldn't help but notice that you've been teaching. I must commend your initiative in helping our classmates learn a new skill. This sort of leadership is exactly what makes UE students stand out." Rin blinked in surprise, feeling a little caught off guard by his sudden appearance. Oh, thanks, Ida. Ida nodded sharply, his glasses catching the light as he continued. However, as your class representative, I also want to commend you for utilizing your time wisely. In that sense, JSL is an excellent skill aspiring heroes could have. Communication is vital in our line of work. And for that reason, I request that you teach me as well. Rin blinked again, this time in disbelief. You want me to teach you JSL? Ida stood at attention, giving her a serious nod. Of course. A hero must be prepared for all situations, including ones where verbal communication may not be possible. It would be a valuable asset for me to learn. Midoriya, who had been quietly listening, smiled warmly. I think that's a great idea, Ida. We've already learned some basics and Rin's a great teacher. Uraraka chimed in as well, her expression bright and enthusiastic. Yeah. It's been really fun so far, and it's something we can use in all kinds of situations. Okay, Rin said, albeit shyly. Do you want to sit with us? I can teach you some basics right now, that way both Midoriya and Uraraka can also practice what they learned yesterday. Ida's face brightened, and with a sharp, affirmative nod, he swiftly pulled out a chair and sat down at the table. I would be honored. Let us begin immediately. Rin grinned, finding Ida's serious demeanor while learning sign language unexpectedly entertaining. His intense focus and exaggerated hand movements made her smile, but she appreciated how much effort he was putting into it. They continued practicing, and every time one of them made a mistake, Rin patiently helped them adjust their movements, offering soft corrections and praise when they got it right. The atmosphere was relaxed, with occasional bursts of laughter when someone made an especially funny mistake. Without even noticing it, the quad had delved into other topics outside of JSL, learning more about each other. So, Risan, Uraraka started after successfully signing, "Thank you," her curiosity piqued. What made you decide to start learning JSL in the first place? Rin hesitated for a moment, thinking back to her time at the orphanage. She shrugged lightly, trying to downplay the depth of her reasoning. Well, it was kind of required where I grew up. They thought learning another language made us more adaptable, and JSL seemed like something that could actually be useful, especially if I wanted to be a hero. Ida adjusted his glasses, his tone thoughtful. Indeed, a hero who can communicate with everyone, regardless of language barriers or disabilities, would certainly be more effective. It's admirable that you thought ahead like that, Kurigaya. Rin smiled at their responses, feeling little embarrassed by the praise but glad they appreciated the idea. Thanks, she said. I just thought it'd be a good way to help more people. You know, make sure no one gets left out. I guess we all have different reasons for wanting to be heroes, Uraraka said, smiling warmly. For me, it's about making enough money to help my family. I want them to have an easier life. Ida added on, I want to live up to the legacy of my family. My brother is a pro hero, and I aspire to be just as honorable and dedicated as he is. Midoriya's eyes shined. He's a pro hero, he said in awe. Which one? Ida pressed his mouth shut, eyes suddenly wide. He pressed his hand up against his mouth and murmured something that sounded a lot like, I shouldn't have said that. Rin raised an eyebrow wryly, catching the murmured words. Shouldn't have said what, Ida? She asked, her tone teasing but curious. Ida's posture stiffened, his hands still covering his mouth, and he looked as though he was debating whether to respond. His eyes darted around, avoiding the group for a moment before he finally sighed, removing his hand. I come from a long line of heroes in my family, Ida began to explain. You might even know of my brother, Ingenium. Rin's expression shifted to one of understanding, the weight of Ida's words sinking in. Ingenium, she repeated softly, recognizing the hero's name. Your brother is the famous Ingenium? Ida nodded, his posture stiff but his gaze sincere. Yes. He's been a hero for as long as I can remember. He's everything I aspire to be. His voice wavered for just a moment before he steadied it. But sometimes, it feels like I'm living in his shadow. I don't mind it really, but it's a lot to live up to. Uraraka's eyes widened slightly. Wow, Ingenium is your brother? That's so cool. But I get what you mean, she added, her tone softer. It must be tough trying to live up to someone like that. Midoriya, who had been quietly absorbing the conversation, nodded as well. It must be hard having someone to look up to, but also feeling like you have to match their legacy. Ida blinked, surprised by his understanding. Yes, exactly. It's not that I don't want to follow in his footsteps, I do. But it's difficult knowing that no matter how hard I try, I may never reach his level. Uraraka smiled warmly. You're going to be a great hero, Ida. You already have the determination for it. Ida adjusted his glasses, a small, appreciative smile forming on his face. Thank you, all of you. I'll do my best not to let anyone down. For some absurd reason, both Midoriya and Uraraka gasp. That's the first time I've seen you smile, Tenya. Ida blinked in surprise at their reactions, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion. What? I smile all the time, he protested, but his tone was more baffled than defensive. Midoriya and Uraraka exchanged a glance before Uraraka shook her head with a grin. Nope, that was definitely the first real smile we've seen. Midoriya nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, you're usually so serious. It's nice to see you relax a little. Ida seemed genuinely taken aback, his eyes darting between them. I suppose I do tend to be more focused on my duties. He paused, considering their words before letting out a small chuckle. I suppose that's something I need to work on too. Rin, watching the exchange, raised an eyebrow and smirked. See? You're already making progress on your journey to becoming your own hero, Ida. Apparently, part of that journey involves learning how to smile more, Uraraka teased, earning another chuckle from the group. Ida shook his head, though a small smile lingered on his face. Perhaps. I will take that into. Ida was cut off mid-sentence by the sudden ringing of the school bell. His small smile faded into confusion as the bell continued to ring. Rin quickly glanced at her phone, eyebrows knitting together in concern. Midoriya and Uraraka exchanged puzzled looks, and Midoriya glanced toward the window as if he could spot the source of the sudden disruption. It's not time for class yet, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Rin stood up, her eyes scanning the cafeteria as other students started to move toward the exits, looking equally confused. What's going on? Ida immediately straightened, his face serious once again. This could be an emergency drill, he said, though his tone carried a hint of doubt. We should proceed to the nearest exit in an orderly manner. Uraraka bit her lip, looking around as the rest of the students seemed to be getting more restless. But it doesn't feel like a drill. The atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted, the casual chatter quickly dying down as everyone sensed that something was off. Rin felt a knot of unease form in her stomach, and she exchanged a glance with Midoriya, who looked equally unsettled. The voice over the school intercom crackled to life, its robotic tone echoing through the cafeteria. Warning, Level 3 security breach. Rin's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately tensed up, her eyes widening in shock. Around them, students froze, some rising from their seats in confusion, while others exchanged panicked looks. The cafeteria, which had been filled with laughter just moments ago, was now filled with growing anxiety. What does that mean? Uraraka asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched her tray. Ida's expression hardened. Level 3 means an unauthorized entry has been detected. The school's protective barriers have been breached. Midoriya glanced toward the windows, his fists clenched. Someone's here, inside Yui. Rin's mind raced as she tried to keep calm, despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. We need to follow protocol, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Stay together, find a teacher or a hero. Don't panic. But as she said it, the tension in the room was mounting, and students were starting to rush toward the exits, pushing and shoving in their haste to escape the unknown threat. The cafeteria was quickly devolving into chaos. Ida, ever the leader, raised his voice above the commotion. Everyone, remain calm. Pushing and shoving won't help anyone. We need to move in an orderly fashion. Rin glanced at Midoriya, who was already scanning the exits. We need to figure out what's happening, he murmured, his green eyes intense. There could be villains inside. Her stomach churned at the thought. She shook her head and clapped her hands. The press. Maybe one of them got caught again. The barriers outside were activated earlier this morning after someone tried to follow All Might. Midoriya didn't seem appeased at the thought. But would a breach like that cause a lockdown? He murmured. Though Ida seemed to get her idea, he quickly ushered Uraraka out of the way as students began to pile up on each other. The intercom blared out again. Level 3 security breach. Remain calm and proceed to the nearest safe zone. Rin's breath hitched as the cafeteria quickly became packed with students, their panicked voices rising above the steady hum of the warning system. Was this a designated safe zone? It didn't feel like it. The students were in disarray, pushing toward exits, some even climbing onto tables in an effort to see over the crowd. The knot in her stomach tightened as the chaos grew. Rin's eyes scanned the room for any sign of direction or a teacher. There was no one there. Ida, ever the voice of reason, tried to make himself heard over the cacophony. Everyone calm down. We need to maintain order and follow the school's safety protocols. But his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of fear. One that Rin herself was beginning to feel. The once calm cafeteria now felt like a pressure cooker ready to burst, and she could feel the suffocating weight of the situation bearing down on her. Her heartbeat quickened, echoing the mounting chaos all around her. The cacophony of panicked voices, shoving bodies, and alarm blaring overhead seemed to drown out any clear thought. For the first time, Rin found herself hesitating. The overwhelming fear wasn't just from the crowd, it was creeping up inside her too, threatening to paralyze her. She clenched her fists tightly, trying to suppress the rising tide of anxiety. Get it together, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the noise. She had to keep moving, had to think. There was no room for fear right now. Midoriya caught her eye, his face pale but determined. Kurgaya, are you okay? He asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Rin's eyes zeroed in on him, focused. She opened her mouth to answer, to tell him she was fine, but before the words could leave her lips, someone shoved her hard from behind, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, falling off the back of her seat, her hands instinctively shooting out to break her fall. The cold cafeteria floor met her palms with a sharp sting, but the impact barely registered in the midst of the panic around her. The sea of students swarming toward the exits surged forward, and Rin scrambled to get back on her feet before she got trampled. Kurigaya. Midoriya's voice was louder this time, filled with worry as he pushed his way through the crowd toward her. He reached down, offering her his hand, his green eyes wide with concern. Rin blinked, shaking off the dizziness from the fall. She grasped his hand, letting him pull her up. Thanks, she muttered, brushing off the lingering unease. We need to get out of here, Midoriya urged, his grip on her hand steady as he scanned the chaotic scene around them. Stick close. Where? Rin swallowed, her voice tight with anxiety. Where'd Uraraka and Ida go? Midoriya glanced around frantically, his eyes darting through the crowd of panicked students. The sea of bodies pushing toward the exits made it almost impossible to spot their friends. I don't know, he admitted, his voice strained. But we need to find them fast. Rin hummed, breathing fast. Hey, Midoriya called out gently. Before she could fully process it, she felt his hand brush softly against her cheek, guiding her gaze to meet his. The touch was brief, so quick that Rin almost wondered if she had imagined it. We're going to be okay, he reassured her, his green eyes steady and calm despite the panic surrounding them. Rin's stomach churned. Pathetic, her mind said, what kind of hero gets scared at a time like this? She gulped down a breath, nodding. Yes, she said shakily, of course, we're going to be fine. Rin's heart raced as she strained her neck, trying to catch a glimpse of Uraraka's short brown hair or Ida's tall, composed figure. But with so many people rushing around, it felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Her mind raced through the possibilities, wondering if they had already made it outside or if they were stuck somewhere in the chaos. Just then, Midoriya tugged on her arm, pulling her closer towards him. There. He pointed toward the far side of the cafeteria, where she spotted Uraraka standing tall, trying to direct students toward a safer path, while Ida floated above the crowd, using Uraraka's quirk too as he yelled. It's just the media outside. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. Everything's fine. We're UA students. We need to remain calm and prove that we're the best of the best. Rin felt a wave of relief wash over her at the sight of her friends. Uraraka's calm and composed presence, directing students to safety, and Ida, floating above the chaos, his voice steady and authoritative, were enough to bring a sense of reassurance. She squeezed Midoriya's hand as they made their way toward them, weaving through the frantic crowd as best they could. They're keeping things under control, Midoriya said, his voice full of admiration for their classmates. Rin nodded, grateful that despite the chaos, they had people like Uraraka and Ida to keep a level head. Thank goodness, she breathed, her grip on Midoriya's hand tightening for just a moment. As they finally reached their friends, Uraraka caught sight of them, her face lighting up with a brief smile of relief. There you are. I was worried you got stuck somewhere in the crowd. We're fine. Midoriya responded, his voice raised to be heard over the noise. Thanks to you too. Are you okay? Yeah, we're managing, Uraraka replied, looking a little out of breath but still determined. We've been trying to help keep everyone calm. Rin glanced up at Ida, who was still floating in the air. He looked down at them, his expression resolute as he continued to direct students. We need to remain vigilant, he called down. It's just the media outside, but we can't let panic take over. Stay focused. Rin smiled despite the chaos. Leave it to Ida to keep everyone in line. Midoriya nodded in agreement, squeezing her hand in return. Look, the police are here, a student yelled out. Huh, turns out it was the press. We should go find Kaken and the others, Midoriya said. Following Midoriya's suggestion, finding the others proved easier than Rin expected. They quickly gathered at Gym Beta with the rest of the first years, following the flow of students trying to regain some sense of order. The panic had mostly subsided by then, and the presence of pro-heroes on site reassured everyone that the situation was under control. The announcement came shortly after, instructing everyone to return to their classrooms now that the police had confirmed there was no real threat, just an overzealous media frenzy outside the school gates. The security breach had been nothing more than reporters trying to get a closer look at All Might and the new batch of heroes in training. As they made their way back to class, the tension from the earlier chaos had mostly dissipated, and the mood was noticeably calmer. Zero, quick with a joke, started making light of the situation. Man, we're practically celebrities now. I swear, one of those reporters totally profiled me, said I had future hero written all over my face. Jairu rolled her eyes with a smirk. Right, I'm sure they were really looking at your face. The group laughed, and with that, they all seemed to settle into a more relaxed atmosphere. As they resumed their lessons, the class moved on to a quick review in algebra, with everyone groaning collectively as they dove into limits and continuity in math. After the math review, Aizawa came back to the room and announced that it was time to discuss electives. He gave each one of them a pamphlet that listed all the available classes. All right, everyone, he said from his desk, his tone as laid back as ever, let's go over your available elective options. You're going to need to choose wisely, because these will supplement your hero training and help shape the kind of hero you become. Quirk theory sounds so cool, Midoriya murmured, his eyes lighting up with excitement as he flipped through the elective pamphlet. I mean, understanding how quirks work on a deeper level, there's so much we could learn. Rin, sitting beside him, nodded. It could definitely come in handy. I'm wondering if the class focuses more on biology or application. Oh, there's also advanced medical training, Midoriya continued. That one will totally come in handy. It says here that they even let students get their advanced EMT license if they're over the age of 16 with parental consent. Oh, but we can also do forensic investigation, he stopped abruptly, before looking at Aizawa-sensei in complete despair. We can only choose one? Their homeroom teacher nodded. Since today was their first day learning about the available electives, they needed to get signed up by their homeroom teacher. When's the deadline? Yaoyorozu asked. I need the sheets back before the end of this class PRD so you guys could start tomorrow. Remember, you only get to do 3 electives throughout your time here in UE, that's a class a year, so choose wisely. A collective groan echoed through the classroom as the realization set in. With so many appealing electives, the idea of narrowing it down to just one seemed impossible. Midoriya's face scrunched up in concentration as he looked over the list again, clearly torn between multiple options. 3 electives total, that's not nearly enough, he muttered to himself, deep in thought. Rin glanced over at Uraraka, who was also staring at her sheet, tapping her pen against her chin. What are you thinking about choosing? Rin asked, curious. Uraraka's eyes lit up. I'm torn between advanced medical training and heroic public speaking. I think being able to speak confidently in front of a crowd would be super useful for when we're heroes, but advanced medical training sounds really fun too. What about you, Kurigaya? Midoriya asked, turning his attention to her. Have you decided? Rin frowned thoughtfully, glancing over the options. I'm not sure yet. I was thinking maybe I could do quirk theory this year, then forensic investigation, then villain psychology. I think that'll make me well-rounded out for facing villains once we graduate. Our main classes already go over everything we need to be a hero. We already have a basic life support class, a hero training class, and a rescue class, but I think those 3 are good supplements. I don't know, Jairu said, body half-twisted to join in their conversation. Villain psychology sounds pretty boring. Rin shrugged, glancing back down at her options. Maybe, but it's not just about what's interesting. I think it's important to understand how villains think and operate. If we can get into their mindset, it might help us prevent crimes before they even happen in the future. Jairu raised an eyebrow. Yeah, but spending hours reading about villain psychology doesn't sound like my idea of fun. I'd rather do something hands-on, like combat strategy or stealth and espionage. Midoriya chimed in, looking thoughtful. I think both are important. Understanding villains mentally and being able to counter them physically. That's the whole point, right? To be well-rounded heroes who can tackle every situation. Are you sure you don't want to take that this year, Kurigaya? I think I'd rather do quirk theory, she admitted, mind made up. It sounds like a good start in understanding villains. Midoriya's eyes sparkled with excitement as he grinned. I think I'm doing that too. I'm really hoping we get to read up on the latest quirk research. Did you know there's a new study from the United States that says quirks are actually getting stronger with each generation because of different gene convergences? It's why about 80% of the global population today has quirks, while only 20% are quirkless. But get this. Researchers found that even the quirkless can be categorized into subsets based on whether or not they have the quirk gene. And for those who have the gene but no quirk, there's this strange connection to the loss of a specific protein in their DNA that affects the joints in toes. That's why people with quirks don't have a second joint in their pinky toe. Midoriya's hands moved excitedly as he spoke, clearly in his element. And just last week, someone confirmed that the loss of that protein has something to do with early neural development. It's so cool, though they still don't know why it doesn't seem to cause delays or problems in newborns with quirks. It's a mystery. Rin blinked, her brain working overtime to catch up with the flood of information. That protein is said to have an important role in setting up early neural pathways in newborns. Theoretically, the loss of the protein should have led to speech and developmental delay. However, there's been no signs of it actually happening the past 2 centuries, ever since the dawn of quirks, creating another mystery in quirk theory. Midoriya was practically bouncing in his seat, his eyes wide with enthusiasm as he continued talking about the latest quirk research. Wow, that's actually really interesting, Midoriya. You're making the class sound really fun. Ashui said. Rin frowned, thinking over what he just said. I don't see how that has anything to do with hero work, though. Midoriya shook his head vigorously. I think it has everything to do with hero work, he said, practically buzzing with excitement as he leaned forward in his seat. Understanding the science behind quirks is crucial for us as future heroes. Think about it. If we know how quirks evolve, how they affect people differently, and how they interact on a genetic level, we can anticipate how villains or even civilians might use their quirks in unexpected ways. Plus, knowing the latest research could help us develop new strategies for dealing with villains or even improving how we control our own abilities. It's not just theory, It's practical knowledge that could give us a real edge in the field. Rin exchanged a glance with Azui, both of them suppressing amused smiles at Midoriya's boundless enthusiasm. His energy seemed to fill the room, and it was clear he could go on for hours about quirk theory if given the chance. But not everyone shared his excitement. Cut it out, nerds. Bakugo's gruff voice cut through the moment. He was hunched over his own elective sheet, glaring at it like it had personally offended him. I'm trying to decide which class to choose without all this extra noise. Rin couldn't help but smirk a little. You're welcome to join the discussion, Bakugo. Like hell I am. Bakugo shot back, crossing his arms. Who cares about all that quirk theory junk? We just need to focus on getting stronger, not waste time talking about people's lack of toes. Midoriya rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, the excitement in his eyes dimming only slightly as Bakugo's words sank in. I just think it could help us in the long run. Tisi whatever. Bakugo muttered, turning his attention back to the paper in front of him. I'm picking something that actually matters, something useful. Rin rolled her eyes but couldn't help feeling that Bakugo's idea of useful probably involved lots of explosions. Well, I know what I'm choosing. You sold me into quirk theory, Quiru. Midoriya blinked, clearly caught off guard. Quiru? Rin nodded confidently as she jotted down quirk theory on her piece of paper, then gave him a teasing smile. Midoriya's cheeks flushed even more, his eyes wide with surprise. Quiru, he repeated, his voice a little higher than usual. Rin grinned. Yep, queer. Short, quirky, and totally fits your obsession with quirks and your quirk, polarize. I mean, you practically live and breathe this stuff, right? Midoriya scratched the back of his neck, his grin growing despite himself. I guess that's true. He admitted, his usual nervousness replaced by a quiet excitement. See? You're totally owning it now, Quiru, Rin teased, giving him a playful nudge. You're lucky I'm not calling you quirky instead. Midoriya chuckled softly, the nickname settling in. It was different, but in a way, it made him feel connected to his passion for quirks. Thanks, Kirigaya, he said, his voice warm. I'll wear it proudly. Class 1A was dismissed after Aizawa gathered the paperwork for their electives. The bell rang, signaling the end to the day, and the classroom quickly buzzed as practically everyone hurried to get out of class. Rin, eager to get some time to herself, packed up her things and stood, giving cheerful goodbyes to her classmates before making her trip back to the orphanage. Her thoughts were already shifting away from school as she walked her route to the train, her mind wandering to the familiar, albeit quieter, routine of returning to the orphanage. It had been a long day, and she had a long week ahead. She has a scheduled visit with her mother this weekend. Rin's steps faltered for a moment, and she let out a quiet sigh. The visits were complicated. It had been years since her mother had given her up, years spent wondering why. The visits now felt more like an obligation than anything else. Part of her still hoped for something, an apology, an explanation, but deep down, she knew better. It was a routine they'd settled into. A few hours of small talk, awkward silences, and the occasional moment where things almost felt normal. But they never lasted. Her mother's life had moved on and Rin's, well, hers had taken a completely different path. The hero path. Hopefully. Rin had no idea what she'd do if she didn't reach her dream. It was as simple as breathing, much like her lungs needed oxygen. She needed to become a hero. The thought of not achieving it gnawed at her, something she couldn't fathom. She couldn't imagine a world where she did anything else. If there was one, she believed she wouldn't be in it at all. It was her purpose. It was what made it all worth it. The familiar chatter of the children and caretakers buzzed in the air as she approached the orphanage. The place was always lively in the evenings, kids playing in the yard, others gathering around tables to do homework or share stories. Rin's steps slowed as she took it all in, her mind momentarily distracted from the weight of her own thoughts. She waved at a few of the younger kids, who greeted her with cheerful shouts. The hustle and bustle of the orphanage always had a way of grounding her, reminding her of where she came from, of the drive that pushed her forward. Ri-san. Haruka's voice rang out as she darted towards Rin, her small feet barely making a sound on the ground before she crashed into Rin with a tight hug. The force nearly knocked Rin off balance, but she quickly caught herself, her arms instinctively wrapping around the younger girl. "Whoa there!" Rin laughed, ruffling Haruka's hair affectionately. "You miss me that much?" Haruka looked up at her with wide, bright eyes and nodded eagerly. "Of course. I didn't see you this morning, and I wanted to show you something." Rin smiled, her earlier worries momentarily fading. "What is it?" Haruka released her from the hug and quickly rummaged through her small bag, pulling out a piece of paper covered in colorful drawings and scrawled words. "I drew you. You're fighting a big villain and saving the day." Rin's heart warmed at the sight of the messy but heartfelt drawing. "This is amazing, Haruka. I love it." The young girl beamed with pride. "You're gonna be a real hero one day, Ri-san, just like in my drawing." Rin's smile softened. "Thanks, Haruka. I hope so." "Yeah, Ri-san," Osamu's voice chimed in from across the room, his tone dripping with mockery. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're gonna be aerial hero, huh?" Osamu was the thorn permanently screwed to Rin's side. He had light brown hair that always seemed to fall messily over his sharp blue eyes, and he was never without that sly grin that grated on Rin's nerves. No matter the situation, he always found a way to poke fun at her or throw a snide comment her way, as if it were his personal mission to make her life just a little more difficult. Rin shot him a look, unimpressed by his sarcasm. "What's your point, Osamu?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Osamu shrugged, pushing off the door frame and walking over with a lazy grin. "Just saying, not everyone gets to be a hero, you know? What are you gonna do when a villain gets in the way? Throw a shield at him? Are you sure Yui didn't mistaken your application with someone else? How the hell are you gonna help anyone when you can't even help yourself?" He shoved her. Rin stumbled back a step but quickly regained her balance, her eyes blazing as she glared up at Osamu. "Watch it," she warned, her voice low and dangerous. The familiar purple glow of her quirk flickered around her hands for a split second before she clenched her fists, suppressing it. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Osamu just smirked, undeterred. "What, you're gonna throw a tantrum, Ri-san?" he sneered. "Maybe your little shields can protect you from a push, but you're kidding yourself if you think that'll work against a real villain. They'll crush you." Rin's heart pounded in her chest, anger flaring up in a way that was hard to contain. But instead of lashing out, she took a slow breath, forcing herself to calm down. She wouldn't let him get under her skin. "Not like this. I got into Yui, didn't I?" Rin shot back, her voice steady but filled with resolve. The memory of All Might's training flashed in her mind. What if the bomb had been real? What if lives had been at stake? She couldn't afford to let doubts, especially Osamu's, get in the way. She just needed her shields to become stronger. "I'm not backing down, no matter what you or anyone else thinks." She squared her shoulders, standing tall as she met his gaze head-on, her determination unshakable. "I'm going to be a hero. And if you want to doubt me, that's fine. But I'll prove you wrong." For a moment, Osamu just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a scoff, he shook his head and stepped back. "Whatever you say, Kurigaya. Just don't get yourself killed trying to prove a point." Rin watched as he turned and walked away, tension still thrumming through her body. She stood there for a moment, forcing herself to take steady breaths. She'd dealt with Osamu's taunts for years, but something about his words today felt sharper, more pointed. Maybe it was because she was finally starting to chase her dream, really chase it, and the stakes had never felt higher. Haruka turned to Osamu with a frown, her small hands balling into fists. "Ri-san will be hero. She's the strongest person ever." Rin sighed, placing a hand on Haruka's shoulder to calm her down. "Ignore him, Haruka. He's just messing around." "He's mean," Haruka said pointedly. Rin grimaced, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, he is," she admitted. "But some people just don't know how to be kind." She gave Haruka's shoulder another gentle squeeze. "Doesn't mean we have to let them get under our skin, right?" Haruka's scowl softened a little, but she still looked unconvinced. I guess, but it's not fair.
Rin
Sighed. It's not. But we can't control how other people act, only how we respond. She smiled gently. And you've got more important things to focus on than JRKS like Osamu, okay? Like where should we frame this up? Rin held up the drawing Haruka made with a wide smile. Haruka's eyes lit up at the sight of her drawing, the earlier frustration forgotten in an instant. You like it? She asked, her tone hopeful. Are you kidding? I love it. Rin exclaimed, beaming as she held the colorful sketch up for a better look. This definitely deserves a spot on the wall. How about we hang it in my room? Haruka grinned, the worry over Osamu fading as she nodded eagerly. Yeah, that's perfect. Everyone will see it as soon as they walk in. Rin chuckled. Exactly. Come on, let's go find a frame for it.